say, well, if to not know history, you are doomed to see it repeat itself. And history does have an occasion of presenting itself, or rather, maybe not replicating an event, but reminding you of an event. And I say that only because I was reminded last night of something that I didn't even realize was basically exactly on an anniversary, a big anniversary, and it's not a celebratory anniversary in Indianapolis. But Rick Carlisle was on this morning with Kevin and Andy on the wake-up call with KB and Andy, and it came up that this is the 20-year mark of the brawl, the Malice in the Palace, whatever you want to call it. And there's nothing that can be said about the brawl from my standpoint that probably hasn't been said 100 times. We all remember it. We all know where we were. I have always said, because I was working at Channel 6 at the time, there is no piece of videotape that made its way onto the airwaves in my tenure in television more than the videotape of the brawl. I've edited that. I could tell you almost frame by frame every single thing of it because I had to edit it so many times to put it on the air, whether it be the court cases or the appeals or the suspensions, all of it, right? But last night, I was kind of reminded, and I didn't think about the numeric significance of it because the brawl was 20 years ago today. But I think that we forget when you think of the brawl because that led to, obviously, ultimately, the departure of Ron Artest and getting traded to Sacramento for Peja Stojakovic, and Steven Jackson and his kind of fractured the relationship with the city. And I think people forget that in the immediacy of the brawl, there was no greater love affair in this town than the fans of the Indiana Pacers and the Pacers themselves. Ron Artest, in the immediacy, was, I mean, everyone was wearing free Ron Artest T-shirts, and he was the guy that was unfairly labeled by the NBA, and the NBA was making an example of Artest, and they came down too hard on the Pacers and not on the Pistons, and nobody cared that the Pistons didn't have security there, and then because you had to, during the suspension and everything else, before it was some of the games were put back, not Artest, but with Jermaine O'Neal, and then you obviously had other players that had gone, Steven Jackson, and other players that had gone into the stands and were serving suspension. So they had, immediately following that game, the game against the Orlando Magic, which was here. Freddie Jones had like 30, I think, had a career high. And the whole city banded around this group of kind of, the remaining roster, and then you ended up with like Tremaine Fawkes and Britton Johnson and guys that were signed at the 11th hour to get Maceo Baston to fill out the roster. But the city rallied behind this group that had to go, the survivors, if you will, after all of the suspensions and layouts and everything else. They had basically 6 guys that went out against the Orlando Magic and hung around and were in the game and basically got rousing ovations from the fans because it was like, you know what? This isn't the best roster. This isn't our best players, or these aren't our best players. This is a depleted, fractured version of who the Pacers really are, but they are still wearing Indiana on their jersey and they're playing hard, and I'm going to stand up and applaud it. And that was once over the course of time when people then began to have a resentment, not a permanent, but a resentment in the moment for Artest when he then demanded the trade, and then people were like, that denied Reggie a ring, and, there were all kinds of emotions that went into that. But in the immediate aftermath of the brawl, I think we lose sight of the pride that people had around here for the franchise itself. And I know that I'm probably the loner when I say this, but I kind of thought that a little bit last night when they were playing Toronto. And hear me out, because it wasn't like they went up there and looked remarkably competitive against the Raptors. But when you knew going into the game, all of a sudden you have no Ben Shepherd. Then you find out Miles Turner has a calf strain or a sore calf. So you have no center at all. I mean, Obi Toppin is like your center, if you will. you've got no Andrew Nimhard, no Aaron Neesmith, no Miles Turner, no Ben Shepherd for that game last night, and yet you go out and the guys that are having to play, Quentin Jackson's having to get significant minutes, Enrique Freeman's having to get significant minutes, Pascal Siakam's basically having to put the team on his back. I know Halliburton's out there in Matherin, but I just thought as I was watching it, I thought if they can pull out this game, if they can win this game, then it kind of feels like that team immediately following the brawl because of the fact that they are so shorthanded that they technically have no business being in this game. But obviously it didn't work out that way, and the Raptors get the win, and now the Pacers are in a position where, they've got to get some help, especially in the front court. Depending on how long Miles Turner's going to be out, they did go ahead and sign somebody. I actually thought, and I know I keep saying this, but Jahlil Okafor being a guy that's within the system because he's playing for the Mad Ants seemed like a guy that would naturally be one that you bring up. But instead, they go elsewhere and sign. Now, Eddie, do we know to the contract that they signed yesterday, it's not a 10-day deal, right?
No, I believe it'll be for the rest of the season. It's not official yet. There's some maneuverings with the cap that they have to do, and that's why they have to wait until tomorrow, as in Wednesday, to sign Moses Brown.
Moses Brown, 7'2". He's played for a number of different teams around the NBA. A player that basically came out of college after a year, got into the NBA, and has bounced around, and now in the G League is averaging, 19 and 10, basically. 7'2", though, right?
19 and 14, yeah.
That's what he's averaging. 14. So 7'2" players, so they try to get themselves some depth there. But nonetheless, obviously losing in Toronto. Scott Agness going to join us coming up 1 o'clock today. We'll talk about that and much more. By the way, Rick Carlisle did have, and it's fairly lengthy, but on the station website, we prefer that you wait until 6 p.m. today so that you can listen to the live programming of this radio station until then. But it'll be up on the podcast center. Rick Carlisle's comments. He had a very reflective, long answer about the brawl and everything that I just talked about kind of this morning with Kevin and Andy. But good afternoon to you on what is today, Tuesday?
Yes, sir.
My name is Jake Query. That's the voice of Eddie Garrison. Jimmy Cook is here as well wearing his Pizza King T-shirt. Jimmy, of course, is the president of the company on Query & Company. Eddie Garrison, the CEO, and I just talk, basically. Jimmy, exciting Monday night for you. Anything good?
Monday Night Football, you see the Texans stomp the Cowboys, which I guess was nice. Everybody likes to see the Cowboys lose. Last night, though, in terms of the Pacers, it is comforting to see what they were able to do despite the shorthandedness, but the Raptors also turned the ball over 23 times. They're the worst team in the NBA, arguably, and it's a game that still feel like got away from you, where you had chances late in that ball game to be able to make a little bit of a run and get back into it. And the reality is, they are going to be shorthanded in this situation. This is what I talked about last week, until they get reinforcements back in Nembhard and Neesmith. And the margin for, I'm not faulting Miles for this whatsoever. Sore calf, second night of a back-to-back. There's going to be areas where you're needing to get rest and massage things along over the course of an 82-game regular season. Unfortunately for the Pacers, last night it was Miles. There might be a night over this road trip or over the rest of the next 2 or 3 weeks while they wait for reinforcements where Halliburton needs a night off or Mather needs a night off or wherever you need to pick your spots. And they are so thin that if they can't sustain it when Toronto is basically giving you the game in terms of where the turnover margin was, where the points off turnovers were, even though you mentioned it, Jake, they didn't have a center to really battle down low against Toronto. They still let Barrett go for 36. That's concerning for me because you don't want this hole to get so far dug that by the time you get reinforcements back, you're middle to back end of the Eastern Conference trying to claim back. The good news is it's mushed around where the footing's fine.
Correct.
It's just an area I'm worried about.
The Eastern Conference in the NBA feels a little bit like the AFC in the NFL, does it not?
Yeah, with everything sandwiched together.
You can be in that middle murky area and still be in pretty good shape because Nevada suck, right?
Yeah, and that's the silver lining with all of this. It's an area where I am not waving a red flag for the Pacers, but it is something that you're going to have to monitor moving forward because there's going to be nights where guys need nights off, and I get that. Like, people can say all they want about all the money and 82-game season. You're going to be nursing injuries, especially when you're as shorthanded in your front court as you are, with Miles Turner basically being your only consistent center on the roster. And if there's nights where guys like Miles need off, if you can't step up and be resilient in those moments, it's going to be a long stretch until you get back valuable contributors like Nesmith and Nembhard, and that's what I'm most worried about.
Speaking
right
of
now.
everybody being stuck in the middle lane in the AFC and in the Eastern Conference in the NBA, I was on the interstate earlier this morning. I had to go up north for a little bit, and I came back. And you ever seen these when there's the guy on the road that's got the wide load, right? So there's the truck that's
Sure.
carrying like a mobile home or something like that.
Yep.
And then behind it, you have one or two cars with flashing lights, and basically like to let everybody in the world know that here comes a wide load, and like you're a complete moron if you don't know when you come up on it that you're coming up on a wide load but then when you pass it, you go like another quarter mile, and then there's one guy that's driving a quarter mile in front of all of it in like a
Usually a van.
late model Lincoln
Yeah.
town car or something. It's got like flags hanging off. Now, what's that guy's job?
He's
Is he
leading the
letting you
caravan.
know that eventually, like way back, because if you look in your rearview mirror, like you can't see the wide load thing. What is this guy's job, and why is he driving to let you know? Like the wide load's not catching up to anybody,
Right.
So what is the job of the guy in front? What's the front guy? I know the trailer guy. I get it because you're coming up on it, but what's the front guy supposed to warn you?
So my first guess, flippantly, would be he's the lead blocker, right? He's trying to just push other cars aside just in case it's necessary to get the wide load ready to go. But my real answer
But
is
he's always like a half
Right,
a
I
mile
know.
in front, right?
perhaps he is like the scout man. So if there's like a traffic jam upcoming, he gets on a radio and alerts the wide load, hey, might want to get ready to ease those brakes on because we got traffic
that's not
upcoming.
a bad theory.
That's
so is that
purely a guess.
Let me
I have
ask
no
you,
idea.
is that the best or worst job on the planet?
That all comes down to money, Jake. I feel like at the end of the day,
Basically, they're like, listen, we need you to drive this like late model Lincoln that's like got the rear suspension problem in the back and a couple flags hanging off of it, but you got to stick in the middle lane at like 64 miles an hour.
if you're making, let's just say, throw out a crazy number out there, 60 or 70,000 a year, and you just turn on Query and Company for that whole drive, you're fine. Like you're living life. It's all good.
We wish we could pay people 60 or 70 just to listen to this program, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I
How
mean,
about
for
you?
what it's worth.
You have a good Monday?
Not bad. Actually, one area where I will push back a little bit on what you said in watching that game last night, and it was never in doubt, right? I mean, the Cowboys are terrible, and you are correct in the fact that there's nothing wrong with watching Dallas lose, except for this: didn't people around here need the Cowboys to win that game? There is very little chance for the Colts left in the AFC South, but they need. The Texans have basically, they still have remaining on their schedule, I believe, Baltimore and Kansas City.
Yes, that's correct. And it is a span of like 4 days between those games, for what it's worth. We talked about that yesterday.
Right. So, and then there was one other like kind of coin flippish game, but the Colts need Houston essentially. If the Colts feel like there's any chance left at the division, which there's not, but if they want to pretend there is, they need Houston to basically lose 4 games, right? So you've got to get them to drop a game that they were not expected to drop.
It's Miami, by the way. And if you're a Miami fan that somehow got our feed, I know you're sitting there thinking to yourself, maybe playoffs are still on the table, perhaps maybe clinging to it. That would be a gotta-have-it game for Miami, as are all their games the rest of the way.
But the problem for Miami, like for the Colts, and the Colts automatically had that tiebreaker, right? And
correct.
Miami's conference record's terrible, which I think is the second tiebreaker.
If you're Miami and you were to mess up the Texans' path to the South, you would have the tiebreak over Houston if the Colts suddenly win the division.
Okay, good call.
I'm putting cart before horse because I don't know where the records would match up, but you would have a tiebreak there and the Colts would win the South.
It would take, though, for Miami to get red hot and Houston to completely fall apart, and for that matter, for the Colts to be – because the Colts' remaining schedule, they have gotten through the thick of it probably, but there are a couple of – obviously this – I shouldn't say they've gotten through the thick of it. The thick of it is this Sunday with Detroit coming in, right? And then after that, it gets a little more manageable, does it not?
Except for Denver. But yes, the rest of it's easier.
Denver's
and Denver,
tricky,
we thought a month ago would have been a game the Colts would probably be favored in. Now the way Bo Nix and that defense have looked, that's no longer a sure thing by any means.
Now, I also figured out last night that the Dallas Cowboys did the Colts a solid.
Yeah?
They did the Colts
okay.
a solid.
Yeah, sure. All right.
The franchise itself did the Colts a solid by forecasting. Now, we've already had in this market arenas falling apart and dropping stuff out of the roof that could potentially hurt people. It happened at Assembly Hall. Thank goodness nobody was hurt when a large beam fell at Assembly Hall right before a game.
While I was there, I was a student at the time. I know I wasn't at Assembly Hall, but I was on campus.
Assembly Hall was empty when it happened,
yes,
right?
Yes, correct, yeah.
I actually have a friend whose seats were like right by there. Of
really?
course, probably all 17,246 people like, goes right by my seat. You know, I mean, I don't know if you know this or not, but there were 274,000 people at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway the day that Gordon Smiley had his accident. But
it's only half as many as the draft in
I was
Detroit.
about to say.
That's right.
You got the NFL counting?
That's exactly right. But for all the times that I and everybody else, notably me more than anybody, complain about the Lucas Oil Stadium roof being closed on beautiful days, maybe the Dallas Cowboys did us a solid by showing us just don't tinker with it. Don't tinker with it, because the last thing you need is, we know that the Cowboys, literally the roof has caved in on the Cowboys season, but the roof caved in last night in their stadium, right?
Yes.
Because in Jerry World, which is like $17 billion that it costs to build that thing.
And the sun comes in blatantly to blind players.
That's
most
right.
notably Cowboys.
But they
very
never
own.
opened. They literally, it was only like the third time or something they've ever opened the roof, if I'm not mistaken. And it looked like a large beam, but then like two guys were carrying it out fairly effortlessly. So was it more like a banner?
I mean, it
fell?
looked like a sheet of metal, like a very thin sheet of metal is the best way I would describe it.
Either way, it would suck if it landed on you, right?
Yeah, I mean, depending on how sharp the edges are, like
No,
Yeah.
I think it'd feel great. I think it would feel great if it just landed right on
I mean,
me,
it
Jake.
looked like a cookie cutter, right? but it was like but it looked more like this. It wasn't like a straight. It was more like this.
Right.
It was one of those, right?
Like from like a old Bugs Bunny cartoon
Yes.
type deal. Yeah.
But it fell before the game, and then they left it open, did they not?
No, they closed it.
No, it was open, wasn't it?
Closed.
I don't remember. I just saw the clip of the roof, that piece falling. I don't know.
So were they in the process of closing it, or they were trying to open it?
I thought they were trying to open
They
it.
were
Or
trying
they
to
had
open it.
Yeah.
And then the NFL security deemed like, hey, we need to close this roof and not leave it open. So they closed it for the game.
So how far away are we now from Lucas Oil Stadium that's just saying, you know what, it is no longer a retractable roof? We
By
know
the
it was
way-
like an extra 113, but we're not.
Yeah, haven't they gone the other way on that now, like you just mentioned? Like, haven't they said they're going to modify it? So now you can't just go back. I mean, I guess you could. It's your team. But I feel like they're on the step of opening it more if they're going to invest money to improve it, right?
No, I think it's.
I think it's the other way. Okay.
I think we should just say, you know what, it was a fun experiment. They play in a dome. End of story.
The Colts just got the Jets GM fired. Adam Schefter announcing that the Jets have parted ways with GM Joe Douglas.
Well, the Jets are a dumpster fire, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that leads to this other thing that I thought of over the weekend, Sunday night. When you watch that game, it was tantalizing, right? There was a level of excitement that came with watching the Colts besides just the fact that they won that game. Because as we talked about yesterday, and we'll talk about Stephen Holder going to join us at 2 o'clock, it'll be a topic of conversation. It'll be a big topic going up and into the Detroit game. And they're going to need Anthony Richardson to maintain what and build upon what he was able to do at the Jets because of the fact that Detroit is a high-octane offense. I mean, we know that. Look at what they did to Jacksonville.
They're brutalizing everybody in their path. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's to the point where you look at Detroit and it's not a matter of whether or not they're going to win the game. It's by how much. And are you going to be able to hang around and make it entertaining in the second half?
And I'm happy for Jared Goff.
Oh, yeah.
Here's a guy that grew up in California, played collegiately in California, was the number one pick in the draft for the Rams, playing in Los Angeles, goes to a Super Bowl, has a supermodel girlfriend. Life's good. Nice-looking guy. Life's good for Jared Goff.
About to say, he's winning off the field more than he is on the field.
He is. And then one day, he gets a knock at the door. Man,
Who's there?
and he opens the door, and it's the GM or the owner or whoever of the Rams, Stan Kroenke. And he says, Jared, your girlfriend's beautiful, and she's a nice gal, and we've enjoyed having her in the suites. And you got us to a Super Bowl, and we are certainly appreciative of that. But unfortunately, in the Super Bowl, you look like you'd never seen a stunt defense before, and we just felt like there's another step we want to take. And I know that you grew up in California, and I know that you probably have a golden bear like tattooed on you, and I know that you love living in L.A., and I know that you kind of look like an L.A. guy. But we've decided that we're going to make a change. But don't worry, you get to go live in Detroit. What? Yeah, well, you get to go play for the Lions, and don't worry, the expectations there aren't high, and so there's not a lot of pressure. But you do get to play in Ford Field, and that's cool. And we've worked out a deal where you get all the Little Caesars pizza that you can eat so long as you go. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, sign me up for that. So I felt bad for the guy, and yet I think it's very commendable that Jared Goff, I'm happy for the guy because he went there, and there are a lot of players that would have been the end. But I thought he fought through that, and now obviously is part of a very high-flying offense and a very good team for Detroit and has them where they are now. They are more so than the Rams, the toast of the NFL. But as the Colts are getting ready for that, and as they're going to need Anthony Richardson to be at the highest of levels to be able to compete with that coming up on Sunday, I thought the New York Jets offered for the Colts a reprieve, not just in giving them a win, not just in giving Anthony Richardson, by not going for it on fourth down, the opportunity to go down the field, but rather they did the Colts a major solid by presenting to them a magic 8-ball and answering for them a question that a lot of people have had. And the Jets did and presented exactly that on Sunday. I'll tell you what that is coming up in just about 5 minutes from now. Scott Agness at 1 o'clock. Also want to remind you that now through the end of the year, anybody who belongs to a monthly car wash program can save $20 off a signature service oil change and get a free tire rotation at any Central Indiana Jiffy Lube. Just point to the car wash sticker to the Jiffy Lube team member, and they will do the rest. Big savings from your trusted one-stop shop for all your vehicle maintenance needs. Talking about Jiffy Lube, where you never need an appointment. What did the Jets show to the Colts that's good news for you Colts fans? I'll tell you that next. answers here. Number one, I appreciate the people that let me know this. The lead car, we haven't answered, Jimmy.
I did see that.
The lead car's got a big pole and or flags on it that alerts the... So, in other words, the lead car is the guinea pig. So he's just cruising along, and he's got a big pole on the front of his car. And if all of a sudden he goes through an overpass and crashes the whole thing, then they know not to send the big load behind through. Guys, this overpass up here of State Road 28, the wide load's not going to clear it. How do you know? Because it's all over the middle of the interstate now because my pole hit it.
The pole broke in half.
That's right. If the pole snaps and or breaks the overpass, then the wide load knows to go ahead and slow down and do a U-turn.
There you go. Educate and entertain, baby.
That's right. That's what we do, right?
That's what I'm talking about.
Now, and that's also one of those where I look at it and I go, that actually makes perfectly plausible sense. How did I not? I figured the guy was just running around looking for weather, or he had that big, he didn't have anything else on his car, so he's just got a huge radio antenna because he's got nothing else to do when he's driving across Kansas.
We were in the ballpark. We said alert. We just didn't know what it was
That's
for.
Right. Okay, so I'm watching the New York Jets in the Colts game on Sunday. And I'm looking at the Jets roster. Some decent players on the Jets roster, right?
Yeah.
Who would you say are their top, let's say, 4 players?
Brees Hall.
Right now.
Garrett Wilson.
Okay.
Sauce Gardner.
Yep.
I hesitate to say Aaron Rodgers because he's...
What about Williams?
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair.
Quincy Williams.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, no doubt.
None of those you mentioned are the quarterback. I mean, you said you hesitate to mention Aaron Rodgers because you're going off the Aaron Rodgers of the past. What the Jets are doing right now, is exactly what the Colts have tried to do for like 8 years. Build a roster, get good players, and then airdrop in a veteran at the end of his career quarterback that's trying to make one last push. And what did it end up doing for the Jets? It got their head coach and now their general manager fired. Because that's what happens when you try to complement a good roster with a fingers crossed he can capture the greatness of the past quarterback that's looking for one last run. Phillip Rivers. We have Matt Ryan. Carson Wentz, a little bit different situation, admittedly. I mean, for that matter, you could even go with like Gardner Minshew, just a Band-Aid quarterback. Not totally the same, but somewhat the same.
Wentz, you were kind of banking on more the Goff, Alex Smith route of a quarterback that in theory still had plenty of years left,
Wentz, they thought was going to be a franchise quarterback. When Chris Ballard got Carson Wentz, more Frank Reich probably saying, look, I can, I'm the quarterback whisperer. I can awaken Carson Wentz and get him back to pre-injury, rookie year, MVP level play Carson Wentz. And there were times he showed it. I thought Carson Wentz, I remember going on with John in the first quarter of the Carson Wentz era and saying, this guy can play. He can definitely play. But there were just, I think, too many things that took place. Nothing overly egregious, but there was definitely and I'll just simply say, a personality rift about Carson Wentz that rubbed the owner the wrong way, and the owner said,
Sure.
I don't want this guy in my locker room.
I mean, on that same front as well, we don't need to fully revisit it, but they were wrong that they could fix him. He never became a starting quarterback again in the league the way that they thought he could.
Yeah.
He's
He
a
had
backup
moments.
in Kansas City
He
now.
did have moments. I mean, the Arizona game, he had moments, right? And he was athletic.
Sure.
I mean, there were things about Carson Wentz. And you know what's interesting is I think, and I could be wrong in this, but I think Carson Wentz still has a permanent home in Indianapolis, in the Indianapolis area. Lives up near Zionsville.
I thought it was Knightstown.
No, I think it's north, right? Northwest, I think, on a golf course near Zionsville, I believe. You may be right, but either way, central Indiana. But just kind of a different dude, I think.
Yeah.
But my point being, for the Jets, as I was watching that and as I was seeing Anthony Richardson make plays and extend plays and shrug off defenders, all I could think to myself was, we have no idea if this is going to be the norm. We have no idea if this guy grows into being this player on a regular basis. We don't know. But what I do know is that what I'm watching at least offers me a glimpse of a 2 to 3 year window of potential that you can build around if it continues to grow, as opposed to watching something where I'm thinking to myself, this needs to come together now because this guy's hanging on by a thread. And Aaron Rodgers, as great as a quarterback as he's been in the National Football League, and as good as he can still be at times, and as poised as he looks at just knowing how to read a defense and whatever else, you can tell by watching him. You have maybe a year left of that at most. That's no way to live. It's no way to live in the NFL because you're constantly chasing it.
I mean, they thought, and before he got hurt last year, I still thought it made a lot of sense from the Jets' perspective because they thought they were like Kansas City in the 90s getting Montana. They thought they were getting this quarterback that was, at one point in time in his career, Aaron Rodgers was viewed by many, if you took the rings argument out of it, as the best quarterback to ever play the sport. Like that's not a crazy thing to say. Legitimate people in football circles thought he was one of the best to ever play the position, if not the best. And that's what they thought they were getting. They thought they were getting a legend that wasn't getting the proper supporting cast in Green Bay, and the Jets had a tailor-made offense ready for him with plenty of weapons and a good defense.
But he was 38.
Right, but like they swung and they missed, and that's to your point, Jake. If it fails with Rodgers and it failed with lesser quarterbacks here in Indianapolis,
Tyrod Taylor, right?
Right, then it's time to finally press the reset button.
And then you go back to, for the Jets, as I always talk about, timing. Garrett Wilson's a good player, really good player, right? Yeah. But now you're set back where, who is the quarterback of the future of the New York Jets? It's not Aaron Rodgers. So whether they go out and they sign somebody again, and now you're into that purgatory, right? And the Jets have been there before as a franchise. I mean, how many Joe Namath, but how many franchise quarterbacks of the New York Jets? Chad Pennington, Mark Sanchez, Richard Todd, Browning Nagel.
They're the same cloth of the Chicago. I mean, they're the worst of the bunch, but they're the same cloth as the Chicago's, the Commanders, that realm of teams that you just think about. And it's like, oh yeah, they've had 20 quarterbacks the last 10 years.
Right. And now you have good young players. You just mentioned good young players they have, but they're going to bring in a quarterback. And next year, probably a draftee, and now your timing is off of your roster. And that with Anthony Richardson, when you look at it, and that's why with Richardson, you have good young players, but at least you have good young players. Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, Taylor, the timing might be off a little bit. Liatu Latu. For that matter, Bortolini, I think has played well.
Maybe A.D. Mitchell, if he continues to grow.
A.D. Mitchell, if he's got to start showing something. But receiver
that are
takes
on that
a little longer,
timeline.
right? I mean, Alec Pierce has shown us that patience can be rewarded. So, yes, you have players that are going to be entering prime along with Richardson, as opposed to the way the Colts have been doing it forever. And while it might be frustrating, the situation with Richardson, and at times it might be trying of your patience what's come with Richardson, the good news is that you're not back into that purgatory that the Jets are into. Now, I am curious of this, Jimmy. If you realize, if you lived in New York and you were not, and this is a tough suspension of reality, but we're going to suspend reality and pretend that you're not a front bandwagoning sports fan.
Okay.
If you lived in New York, you would not be able to be a Jets fan. You know that, right?
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll explain, and then Scott Agness joins us in 20. So, Jimmy, if you lived in New York, you are already a Yankees fan, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now,
No, he's not.
in the New York metropolitan area, Eddie, let me
Know what
ask
we're
you,
doing.
if you lived in New York, Eddie, what would be your baseball team?
Cincinnati Reds.
If you had to be a fan of a New York baseball team, which one would you pick?
Neither.
Thanks for playing along. Okay, so Jimmy, if you were living in New York and you're a Yankees fan, which NFL team would you pick, would you say?
Probably the Jets.
Buffalo.
And which NBA team would you select?
The Knicks.
Jimmy? Okay. Which NHL team would you select?
Islanders.
The Rangers.
Okay, you got 3 out of 4 correct. In New York, you basically are, they come as a group. You're either a fan of the Yankees and then their alignment. Yankees,
it's a package set. Okay, I understand.
Yankees, Giants, Rangers, and Knicks. Then if you're a
The
Jets
Mets
fan,
contingent. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
it's Jets, Mets, Nets, Islanders.
That makes
because
sense.
the Jets are basically the Burrows team. They're like the blue collar team, and the Wall Street teams are Yankees. The
Sure.
mix that the Knicks would be the one that kind of crosses both,
Right.
because the Nets forever were in New Jersey, and I mean,
And they're still not fully accepted. Like,
correct. Who cares about New Jersey, right?
Yeah.
Now I have a the old script hats. Now everything's coming back in vogue, right? But the ones that just like for the Pacers, Pacers are big lettered script Pacers, and then above it in smaller letters it just says Indiana.
yeah.
I have one of those that's royal blue,
Ooh,
and in white lettering it says New Jersey Nets.
nice.
Now is that cool throwback?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Like, can I wear that now? Is that hipster? Am I old enough that Eddie's looking at me
That's
like
sick,
I'm crazy?
Jake.
Huh?
That is sick.
Is it?
Yeah. Totally rad.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Now,
Wouldn't say it's whack.
if you look at the hat that Reggie
you do
Miller
that?
was
You do
wearing
that?
when he got drafted, Reggie Miller, when he got drafted, was wearing a royal blue Pacers hat with the yellow that I just described. And I was a ball boy for the Pacers. I wasn't a ball boy for the Pacers like a sweep the court ball boy, but I was a ball boy back when. I don't think they have this now, but the Pacers used to have a program where you got a sweatsuit and you got the hat, and then you passed out stuff to fans as they entered the arena, whatever the handouts were that
Sure.
night. Schedules or magnets or whatever else. And you also got a pair of high top Pacer shoes. And I loved it. It was awesome. I got to go to like 15 games a year, my buddy Dave Steinberg and I, in the 88 season. And they had those awesome hats. And I lost the hat, and I will pay top dollar to somebody that can find me that hat.
When did you say you could? Have you done an eBay search yet?
Oh, yeah. It's got to be a specific kind, though. I'm very, very finicky about it.
Okay.
Either one of you guys, top dollar I'll pay. Now, I also put a limit on top dollar. But more than the hat's worth is what I'll pay for it. Strictly for nostalgic sake, right?
So you've definitely searched for this in some capacity then on online websites if it's this close to your heart, I would think.
Oh,
right?
my gosh.
Like this has been an ongoing, decades-long journey to find this
Like
hat.
routinely. Okay. It's this hat. I realized it. It's this hat, but in royal blue instead of navy blue. I'm showing Jimmy the picture of the hat.
Yes.
If you could find that hat in royal blue, and it's got to be the soft, like
If you put a
not the hard twill.
if you tweet it out, I'll retweet it on Query_Company. That way we can send it out to the
Well, I've got
masses.
to find the
Is it
hat.
this one?
That's the problem. Yeah, but see, that's close.
Okay. I'm
But
just trying to get a.
But I need that material's like I need the softer material.
Okay. But
yes.
that color?
Correct.
Okay.
Let me see that color.
This is great for the audio audience.
Now I realize
It's more of a Butler blue.
Are you looking correct? Are you looking at a used model?
Yeah, it says rare vintage sports
Okay.
specialty.
What I'm looking
Are
for
you
is a
against
new.
that?
I'm looking for a new model.
You're looking for new with tags.
I
Okay.
ain't wearing
That's-
somebody else's lid.
Well, that's going to be harder to find. Then you're going to have to
I don't know
contact
if
the
you
team
know,
store and
especially
ask
if it's
them.
Eddie's. If it were Eddie's
This
old
is the
hat, I'd
one.
use it as a hula hoop.
Well played.
I'm just saying, for what it's worth.
You know what blue we call that, Jake? Decatur Central blue right there.
Is it really?
I don't know. I was just being
What's Decatur
facetious.
Central's colors?
Navy blue and gold.
That's not Navy.
You're not
I
gonna.
need royal
I know.
blue.
You're gonna have to either contact the team store or lower your standards because the chances of you finding a new with tags or hardly worn hat like that. You're
But
already,
here's the thing. Everything vintage comes back, right?
sure.
And so that's come back, but not that particular one.
Well, I think we could safely say that of all of us, especially based on tenure, you have the most pull in market to be like, hey, Pacer, let's bring this hat back. Eddie and I can't do it.
I don't know about you, Jimmy, but I'm a celebrity around
Here's-
this town,
well,
so
Here's Reggie Miller putting on that hat when he was drafted. That's the hat I'm looking for. Basically, if that's the hat right there.
That looks like that hat I showed you.
Yeah, but I need the cheaper twill. That's too.
All right.
That's a. I don't know how to describe it. I need the cotton one.
Well,
I need the
it's
one that basically looks like.
$55, so I'm not buying that so you can test the material. I apologize, but there's a limit.
Just
to
so
my
you know, just so you guys
care
know,
here.
I did a major hat cleanse during the purge, the post heart attack cleaning purge.
Yeah.
And I still have a ton of baseball hats, but I got rid of a bunch of. When I was in college, I went through a whole phase with those. Hats were the deal, man.
I'd wear that hat, take a screen grab of it, send it to the Pacers. Be like, hey, let's get this old retro throwback night.
Oh, I go to the gift shop there. I
Sell
go
it
there
for $40 a pop. You'll be fine.
probably every third game that I go walking through the gift shop and look for them. Now, which leads to my one other question before Scott Agness joins us coming up in just a minute here. Without looking, Jimmy Cook without looking, Eddie Garrison without looking, I need the answer off the top of your head. You ready? The old school Pacers logo of the ball being shot, left or right-handed. Eddie, go.
right.
Jimmy.
Right.
Ooh. You're both incorrect. It's left-handed.
I just followed Eddie.
I haven't seen the logo in forever, so I just
Oh,
took
sure
a
you
guess.
have. But you see the thumb.
It is a left hand. Yep, you're
You
right.
see the thumb, so you know it's a left hand. And the original design of it, if I'm not mistaken, they designed it based on someone holding a tennis ball, for what that's worth.
There's no way it would have been to the right because of the P.
What's that?
There's no way it could have been to the right because of the P. Like it would have been backwards had you done it to the right. You're right. It has to be to the left because the angle of the Pacer P.
It could still be a right hand. You just wouldn't see the thumb on it. You would just see the side of the hand.
But then it would, like from a artistic standpoint, it would look weird if you had the right hand blocking it. Then you're blocking the shot if you place it that way, right?
Well, here's the thing,
No.
Jake. You don't know if the ball is being shot or being blocked.
Could be grabbed out of the air.
Yeah.
Well, the Roy Hibbert, Carmelo Anthony block basically was the exact logo,
Yeah.
right? Looked just like.
You are correct, though. It is the left. Yeah.
Your thoughts on the game last night? Your impressions of it, Eddie? I'll begin with you.
Just shorthanded. And if you don't have Tyrese Halliburton playing at a high level when you're already without Aaron Nesmith, Andrew Nimhard, Ben Shepherd, then you don't stand much of a chance, especially when the other team's shooting 50% from the field, 40+% from three. And they just have a lack of depth defensively at defending wings without Shepherd or Nesmith or Nimhard. The only guy you can really throw out there to defend like an RJ Barrett or a Grady Dick is Jarris Walker, and right now that they just don't have enough bodies. So it's hard to even summarize what this team is just because we haven't seen it all together.
Jimmy, your thoughts?
I mean, similar sentiment there. The Raptors are a bad basketball team. They turned the ball over 23 times. You scored 24 points off those turnovers, and this game still wasn't that close. This is going to be a problem for them until they get Nesmith and Nemhard back. Forget about the front court issues. When you have this thin of a roster and you're going to have nights over the course of an 82-game season where one or two stars are going to need a break through the gauntlet of the regular season, other guys are going to have to step up. Eddie's right about Halliburton, but it's the same thing with Nemhard. It's the same with Siakam. You can't have bad nights from any of your star players when you're this thin, especially so when you have a star that needs a night off. That gets magnified later that we get into the season with these injuries, because for right now, Jake, you made the argument earlier. You could say it's fine because of how bunched up the Eastern Conference is, but there's going to be separators at some point, and if you're behind the eight ball, you're making your entire life as you're making a playoff push later in the season more difficult if this is going to be a concern on a nightly basis. They're just too thin.
Speaking of concern, do you have it about Tyrese Halliburton?
No, I don't.
I'm going to ask Scott Agness if he does, and I'm going to do it next. By the way, if you are listening to us on YouTube or on the stream, we greatly appreciate it. It seems kind of non-purposeful for me to say if you're listening to us on 107.5 and there's an issue, we're aware of it because you wouldn't be able to hear it right now. But I don't know if it's weather-related or whatever. Occasionally it does happen with the signals, of course, in modern technology. And our crack engineering staff, which are the best, are on their way out to make sure that everything gets fixed up, and we will be back on 107.5 as well shortly enough. So we appreciate those of you who have crossed over and are listening to us in a different variation. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tires and Auto Guest line, of course, Fieldhouse Files is where you can read his work. You also hear him on this radio station, Scott Agness, in covering the Pacers. Scott, this is probably not unique to Indiana. There are several teams in the NBA that have dealt with the injury bug. But, boy, for the Pacers, it feels like when it rains, it pours. Where do we stand in terms of getting an idea of when Indiana will be back to even a semblance of full strength?
Yeah, good afternoon, Jake. It's probably going to be a couple weeks when Andrew Nembhard will likely be back, and then maybe a week or two after that I could see for Aaron Nesmith. They both are progressing. Nesmith's in a boot during games, but I'm told he's out of the boot outside of that. And then you're working in a new center this week is something. And then, of course, Ben Shepherd suffering an oblique injury. Those usually keep you out
muscle,
about,
right? Is that right?
Yeah, stomach, abdomen, core, which is a little bit concerning, right? Because you use that for everything, diving on the floor, putting up three-pointers, rebounding. So that's consequential. And I think I think that's something that you'll usually see a player miss a couple weeks. I think they're a little bit more excited that he can be back perhaps before that. But I would generally anticipate that keeping a player out 2 to 3 weeks. So I think realistically in the big picture, Jake, you want to circle back probably the 1st of December where you might have a semblance of a full-strength roster as best as you're going to see.
Scott, to me, Miles Turner's a big one, and I know that it was just a sore calf, but the reality is, and I know that he's been a polarizing player for the fan base, but Miles Turner to me is the player they can least afford to lose because just based on the non-depth of the position, right?
Entirely. Well, and a lot went into that, right? Because they were playing their third game in 4 days. The previous game at home on the front end of a back-to-back, he played over 40 minutes, was the star player, took 10 more shots than anyone else on the team. So he had a heavy workload in that game on top of that. So I don't think that's anything to be concerned about beyond missing a game or two. I think that's more the circumstances that went into that with the right calf strain. He even posted on Instagram treating it on the plane ride to Toronto. But you're right. That's the position. It's ironic because at this position 2 years ago, Jake, they had way too many centers. They had 6 of them. And they moved on from Goga, and you move on from Daniel Tice. And now, just because of injuries, it turns out at this moment they only have Miles on the roster.
Scott Agness is our guest of Fieldhouse Files. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Scott, we know that the Eastern Conference itself is pretty mushed together from a standing standpoint very early in the season, but Jake just brought up Miles, and over the course of any 82-game season, you're going to need days off for guys, whether it's legitimate injuries or whether it's just a rest because it's the second night of a back-to-back. Are the Pacers at a point, though, right now with how thin they are that they don't have the luxury to do that? They're going to have to push guys further than maybe the fully healthy roster would allow them to?
I don't think so. I don't think the team would do that. In terms of days off, right now they're basically in a cadence where they're not going to have much practice time at all for the next 3 weeks because they play 4 games in 6 days in each of the next 3 weeks starting this week. So there's no real practice time. You're going maybe through walkthroughs, get some shots up, but you are not holding out guys, I don't think, for a load management or, hey, you're tired, let's sit you. I think they are going to be overly cautious right now given injuries. Like, this has hit them hard, and they don't want to take any risks. But I would not foresee them holding out a guy, well, he's just not feeling right today.
But I just mean they don't have the luxury to even do that if they wanted to. And I know that Miles was a legitimate injury, but like you could make the argument if there's and I know it's dangerous at that position with how thin they are, but you can make an argument, let's take away Miles. Let's say Benedict Mathurin has a, sore knee, or he has like the ankles, doesn't feel 100%. you don't have the luxury that you would have with this roster at full strength to say, hey, let's go ahead and sit you down and take the night off because of how shorthanded they already are.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. The fact that the Mad Ants aren't even with their 3 two-way guys, all 3 two-way guys were needed up in Toronto, that exactly explains your point right now. The fact that Quentin Jackson is getting 20 minutes per game, and Johnny Furphy is another guy. I don't think that's going to be an injury that's going to keep him out, but it's certainly limiting him. I believe that hand injury suffered at a home game like 3 games ago, and it's continued to bother him. And so maybe ordinarily you'd get time to let that rest. And on top of that, Jimmy, you'd give him time to go play with the Mad Ants and get valuable reps before being thrown out into this. But right now, they need all bodies on deck right now just because of considering their circumstances.
Scott, this is a question that I've asked for the last month, and it's kind of a dead horse maybe. I don't know, but I'm curious of this, though. Jahlil Okafor is a guy that has a lot of experience in the NBA, was a top 5 pick. I realize that he's bounced around a little bit, but now that he's with the Mad Ants, considering that they need backup bigs and they go out to elsewhere in the G League and sign one and bring them in, do you think Okafor was even considered for that position?
Well, first of all, he would have to sign a new contract to even make it happen.
Okay, so he is not on a 2-way deal, right?
Correct. And
okay,
so he's
gotcha.
technically on a G League deal. So it's not as seamless and being like, hey, let's call him up to Toronto and see if he has anything. You would completely have to sign him to a new standard contract. Now, no big deal. It could be a non-guaranteed, but there would be that formality you have to go to, and they do have one open roster spot as of this moment. Now, they're going to sign Moses Brown to that. Now, is he ready? I think you do consider him. The realistic thing is I just don't think he can endure that right now. There's a reason he's in the G League. He's gone through so many different trials and injuries and those sorts of things. Now, he did have a productive game last night with 22 and 9, but you're going against G League guys, and so he can be more productive. And so it is telling to me that they didn't bring him up because I think if they felt comfortable enough with it, they absolutely would have. That would have been an obvious choice.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was watching, they brought all the G League players out on, I can't remember if it was Friday or Sunday at halftime.
Sunday,
and I saw him there, and, again, kind of inconsequential, right, for everything that we just discussed. But I just thought it was interesting. Like, I noticed when he was walking off the court, like, he is the one player that kind of had the most interaction with the current roster of the Pacers, and understandably so, because he's the guy with the most, I would think, on that roster with the most NBA experience, right, and at a position where they need it. That's the only reason why, to me, it maintained as curious. But
same draft class as Miles and played with TJ McConnell in Philly. Lloyd Pierce was a coach there in Philly. There's a lot of familiarity with them, but I just don't think, as I understand it, his body is comfortable or capable, especially the level in which the Pacers are trying to play with the pace up and down the floor.
Okay, here's a question that I'm going to ask you that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And Scott, I'm almost hesitant to ask it because I don't want to be an alarmist and I don't want to be like hot take guy, right? But it seems to me, now we have seen, and I certainly saw it on Sunday when Tyrese Halliburton from the outside can get that lightning in a bottle, where he hits a couple of threes and, he barely even touches net going down and you're like, he's just on it, right? Mm-hmm. But I have seen more so this year than last periods where I just see like almost a carefree nature, lazy pass, just not as aggressive offensively and attacking. Are we seeing a too relaxed Tyrese Halliburton, or am I being too critical?
I don't think we're seeing a fully healthy or comfortable Tyrese, and you got a lot of moving parts around him. I think it's still undervalued, him losing Buddy Hield at midseason last year. That was kind of his safety blanket, both in how he interacted and what he knew players would do, but also how Buddy would open things up for everyone else out there. So I think that's a factor. I mean, his splits home and road have been alarming, I think, more than anything. And then also, Jake, his three-point shooting. His second shot just hit the backboard last game. His second three-point shot, like you don't see that from an all-NBA guy. And so I think now he's also having to be pushed. Like last night I was thinking about it. you cannot have Tyrese, your highest paid player in franchise history, in a game where you're without like a half dozen players, still be your fourth best scorer on the team. Ordinarily, something is off. I entirely agree with what you're seeing.
Well, Scott, I'm going to go back to, and I can't recall which game it was. I hate to say they run together, but what game were they? It was like 2 weeks ago. He was at the free throw line late. And he gets the ball, and like he didn't even dribble or look at the basket. He just like kind of threw it up there, and I thought there was a lack of focus or attention to detail that to me seemed uncharacteristic. And I don't want to be an alarmist with it, but it just doesn't seem like maybe we were masked by the honeymoon period a year ago of his emerging stardom. But it seems to me like there has been more of an effort almost to be like too cool for school than to always go all in. And I think he's a wonderful player and a good guy, don't get me wrong, but it just seems like there are more streaks of that lapse of focus than we saw a year ago.
The thing I would like to see is for him to address it head on. Like when asked about it by the media every time, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I'm good. What's up? It's like, no, clearly you're clearly working through something. Whether it's the attention to detail, whether it's your three-point shot, whether it's the assists have not been for last season. Now, again, I acknowledge you're missing a lot of your key teammates out there, so you're having to make do with what it is. Maybe it's distractions. That's something you have to keep in mind, Jake. Right? He's part of a Netflix documentary that they're filming right now. He had that new Puma deal. Maybe those are things that you could consider influencing things right now. And he's the first year of a new contract. Last year, remember how focused he was to not only stand out and be that all-star level performer, but also the intent to play all 65 games to qualify for All-NBA. He had those motivations every single game. All that maybe factors into it.
If you had to get a shoe deal, Scott, who are you going with? Who are you going with? What brand is your style?
For me, it would easily be Nike, both from looks and I think they make the best basketball shoe.
Jimmy?
I mean, it's hard to argue Nike. If I was going just for basketball purposes, yeah, I would definitely go Nike.
Okay.
What about you?
Well, I got to go Adidas, man. I grew up in Bob Knight's, Indiana. I got to go Adidas. I do like the Pumas, though. I like Tyrese Halliburton's Pumas, Scott. I think they're pretty cool. Like the ones he had on Sunday were cool.
Mm-hmm.
I
like the look.
Yeah, when I'm at the game, I always say, okay, if you could get any guy's shoes on the floor right now, which one would you wear? And Sunday when I did that, Halliburton was not on the floor. I went with Bam Adebayo, and he was wearing Nikes, I think, because they were the most simple looking. But they were Nikes.
Sure. But
I do like Adidas. But they have to be – I don't like the new the way they're doing the new 3 stripes, like the diagonal thing. I need all the way across, up and down stripes. I'm very particular.
Yeah, I get that.
Very particular.
The thing I wonder about with all these injuries, and I'm not speaking just on the Pacers – I don't know how you look into this or do a complete study, but I would be fascinated if someone did it over the last 5 or 10 years. We see the new influx of shoe brands enter mainstream markets, talking about NBA players, right? How does that directly impact players, their injuries, that sort of thing, when you're not only changing shoe companies, but you're also changing shoes with great regularity?
No question.
You see Puma, you see New Balance, you see Anta from overseas. You've gotten away from let's call them the main two, right, with Nike and Adidas. Maybe you had Reebok back in the day. This would be something I'd be very curious about. I know the star players, too, by the way, they have orthotics. Those are all custom, so when you put that in, it feels natural. But a lot of them are changing to brand new shoes every single game.
Scott, I do want to go back to Halliburton for just a second, because it's not just you. I've heard other people throw out, is it something health-related for him? And if he's not on an injury report and the Pacers aren't handling him like he's still hurt, at what point is that no longer a valid speculative reason for why he's struggling? Because I'm not in the camp where I doubt him. I think he's just going through an extended slump. I think he's, like, statistically speaking, you mentioned the three-point shooting percentage especially. What he's going through right now is worse than anything we saw last year, even when he was hurt. Like, the numbers gotten a little bit better, but he was walking in end of October, early November, a 27% three-point shooter, which is a statistical anomaly for the rest of his career. So I think he's going to come out of it. But when I hear people say, well, he could still be hurt, and that's not what's being presented, at what point is that not a valid rationale for why he's struggling?
Yeah, and it's more, to be clear, than just three-point shooting. His numbers are
Right.
down
I just highlight
all
that because
across.
you brought it up. But yes, they are all down.
Yeah, and I'm trying to emphasize to
Sure.
fans, too. It's not just the three-point shot that is off. You go his overall field goals down from basically 48% to 38%, and his free throws down from like 86 to 82. So it's across the board, which does speak to maybe a broader issue. And this is a nuanced conversation. I think it all goes back, Jimmy, to the offseason where he really did not have a true offseason, right? He took a first month off to allow for that hamstring injury that kind of lingered and then kept him out for those final 2 games in the playoffs. He tried to see that heal and rest as best you could because with hamstrings, that's about all you can do is get off of it. Then he ramped up to 2-a-days before Team USA. Then he traveled the world and going to like all these different destinations, which is not, as we know, easy on your body. And then having several injuries from a calf injury to to me, it felt like, Jimmy, he just never was fully healthy, therefore he never fully got comfortable, and so he's playing catch-up is what I'm viewing. And so, yes, maybe there's no official injury on the injury report, maybe with a sore lower back, an injury, or an issue, not an injury that he's dealt with that he says going back since he can remember, that continues to bother him. I think all those factors and not having a good, clean, successful offseason where you could work on your game, but rather was focused on either resting or rehabbing, I think those are the biggest contributing factors to where he is right now.
That is fair, and I want to ask about the front court in a second, but just to kind of put a bow on this, the only thing I would leave with that is LeBron James, Anthony Edwards, Jason Tatum, like Devin Booker, they went through that same crazy offseason. The only difference is perhaps they weren't hurt, right? Like Halliburton was clearly rehabbing something. He did not play towards the back end of the Olympics because he was still injured. Like that, I'm on board with the rehab part and trying to balance everything. And maybe he is like, you know, to a lesser extent, not because he's out of shape, but just to normalize himself. It's like Shaq back in the day using the regular season as a time to get your body back up because you didn't have a normal offseason. I get all that. Where I kind of draw the line, though, is the other stars that were part of that Olympic team, you're not seeing that set in those markets of, oh, well, they had the longer offseason or the shortened offseason because of the Olympics, and they're struggling.
One guy I have been keeping tabs on is Luka. Luka's numbers are more consistent, I will say, with Tyrese. Now, again, are they the exception or
Sure.
what have you? But there are multiple players out there that kind of fit that description. But I totally agree with you. You're right.
Do you think that the Scott Agness joins of the Fieldhouse Files on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, Eddie had pointed it out during the start of the show today. I know that it's still finances being worked out, but is acquiring Moses Brown the way that they did indicative of a hesitancy to make a trade at this stage, or more so of just where they are financially?
I think it's more the latter in combination with, if you're trying to make a trade, generally you got to wait another month till mid-December when a lot more guys become available, because if you sign in the offseason, you got to wait 6 months before you became trade eligible.
Sure.
And so that severely limits the pool in which you could you are allowed to do trades. And so you're considering free agents. And again, the reality is if you're not signed, there's probably a reason for that. Although I know Jake was wishing for Bismack Biyombo
That's right.
to make an appearance.
You know why
here.
he's my favorite player in the league, Scott?
Yeah, I do, because he's Big Mac Biyombo.
Yeah, his name's Bismack
Nailed
Biyombo.
it.
That's right. Now, he's not in the league at all, though, right? He's just hanging out, right?
Correct. Yeah, he's a free agent. And so I thought, he doesn't exactly fit this playing style, but right now you're at the juncture where I think you need to show the team, hey, here's some support in the short term. Here's some support right now, because it was just strange to see your 2 backup centers go down with the same injury within 10 days apart. I mean, I'm not sure we have ever seen it, but now it's been 3 weeks without a backup center, and so I'm glad they're finally moving forward and bringing Moses Brown in. They had a pro scout checking out the Westchester Knicks 1 week ago. And was able to see Moses Brown. Didn't have a great game, but then he played the main Red Claws the last couple of games, has really performed well. And I think he's a good stopgap, right? He doesn't exactly fit their playing style, but he adds size. He immediately becomes the tallest player on the team. He has good hands. He can finish around the basket. You don't ask too much of him, and I think he can be solid.
Is it safe to say, Scott, that when the Pacers when they're back at full strength, and by that I mean when Neesmith's back, Nembhard's back, that Benedict Mathurin stays in the starting lineup and they adjust, or does he go back to being offensive pop off the bench?
Who is that specifically?
Benedict Mathurin.
Matt, yeah, that's a good question, right? Because Matherin's popped here over these last couple of weeks. Someone has really benefited. The challenges, and I think this is what the coaching staff harps on, is the consistency. And it's not even from game to game. It's from half to half. Whereas you want to see more of that second half Mathurin like we saw last night. I think he scored 11 in a row in that fourth quarter, then assisted on the next basket. He had his mom and sister sitting courtside. If he plays at that level like he did last night, I don't think you remove him from the starting lineup. And that also allows for you to ease back either Nembhard or Nesmith in doing so. And so it's one of those where Rick Carlisle's always emphasized he's got to earn it. Right now, I think he's earning staying out there, and it would also allow those guys to take their time in their return.
Pacers Rockets in Houston tomorrow night, and then on Friday it is on to Milwaukee for the Pacers before they come back and conclude the weekend at home, taking on the Washington Wizards on Sunday. Scott Agness will have all the coverage at Fieldhouse Files. Scott, appreciate it.
All right, thanks, guys.
Scott Agness joining us. Express Pro Tire and Auto Gas. Yeah, Matherin's one of them that, you think about players that, the microwave, right? Like Vinnie Johnson, comes in and heats up, right? Matherin's one of those that I think he's just kind of got to be thrown out there into the Wolves and get it going right away. And it just feels like he is better at the starting position than he is in coming off the bench because of once he gets going, he's really going, right? But it just feels like he is the one guy that just has, to me, Jimmy, like a dog mentality of get out of my way and give me the ball.
He can go get you a bucket. He's versatile, and he's improved on the defensive end as well. And that, for me, is the biggest thing, because the 1 point against Mathurin being involved as a starter was his effort defensively had to get way better. And he's by no means, a full-scale two-way player that you're not worried about him in any situation on the floor defensively, but his effort level is improved, and he's been a more consistent defender in the early goings of the season, to the point that the gap of what are you gaining defensively with Nembhard or Nesmith that is not offset by the offensive prowess of Benedict Mathurin, that's no longer an advantage to Nembhard and Nesmith. It's now an edge for Mathurin for me because he can do both, and he's arguably the best pure scorer of a go-getter type that you mentioned on that roster. If and when Nembhard and Nesmith come back, I'm all in on Benedict Mathurin. He's more than earned being a piece of that starting lineup and is the perfect running mate within the backcourt of a Tyrese Halliburton-Benedict Mathurin duo.
The change in the NFL today that came about perhaps as a result of the Indianapolis Colts on Sunday, that's not something we typically see in the middle of the season, is it? Isn't that typically an off-season thing?
It's happened twice for the Jets now, unless you're talking specifically for general managers. But yes, you are correct. That doesn't happen a ton.
I'll tell you what it is and what we mean by that when we come back. Stephen Holder going to join us, by the way, 2 o'clock. It is halfway past 1 o'clock in Indianapolis. For that matter, it's halfway past 1 o'clock everywhere in the Eastern time zone. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison is manning controls for us today and just went out. Eddie was gone for the last 30 minutes. I don't know if anybody noticed that or not, but we actually dressed him in. We sent somebody down to Needler's down here that used to be O'Malley's, and then there's a Kroger nearby too, but we sent somebody down there and they bought a bunch of Jiffy Pop, and we took the foil out of that, took the popcorn out of it, wrapped Eddie in the foil, and he went out and actually stood on top of an antenna, and my understanding is as a result of that, refired 107.5. So we're back.
I can't imagine they didn't see Eddie.
We are apparently back on the air. Eddie's like the lead car that drives along in the big radio tower for the wide load that we're talking about.
By the way, you remember, was it earlier this week or was it last week we were discussing the insulation joke that was made between
Last week, yeah.
Yes.
Olivia, my girlfriend,
Yes.
to me? It came up again over the weekend.
Oh, did she mention your
Organically?
insulation?
Yes.
What
Wow.
did she say?
So we were out for her stepdad's birthday,
Okay.
and her parents, or stepdad and
what's
her
stepdad's
mom,
name?
Tony.
Tony. Okay, happy birthday, Tony. Yeah.
That was on Saturday. We were out in Broad Ripple because his birthday is also their anniversary. Her mom and her stepdad.
A lot of holidays. Nice.
Yeah, so we all went out. It was a big gathering and whatnot, and we were walking out. I didn't have a jacket on. I just had a polo and jeans, and she was all dolled up, looking great.
Nice.
And I said, "What are the odds?" The first thing your mom says to me when I see her is, "Where is your coat?" And she's going to say, "Well, you're very insulated.
And is that
You're
what
naturally warm." That is what Olivia said to me right then and there, and then ended up happening.
Do you think she's dropping hints to you?
I don't know.
I'm just saying.
I mean, does she
What-
not
I
realize who
don't-
she's with?
Have you
I
noticed
don't-
a change in what's in the pantry, Eddie? Like, are there other subtle
Well,
clues that
here's the
perhaps
thing.
you're missing?
She does not do the grocery shopping.
All right.
Eddie, I find you to be a sleek and sexy individual.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so don't worry about it.
It means a lot coming from you.
Jimmy, thank you. Jimmy Cook, the other voice you hear on this program, who is now, I'm sure, feeling awkward. A bit of a change in the NBA that we're going to get to in just a second. But before we do so, if you are just joining us,
Where have you been?
the New York Jets got rid of their general manager today. Nobody around here cares. It's the New York Jets, except for that. What does that say about the Colts? They're like, look, we could stand about everything, but you lost to the Colts at home.
Everybody
not
has to have a
saying that's the
line
cause.
somewhere. Yeah.
But it does feel twofold. Maybe I'm off base here, but it feels like managerial changes like that, front office changes, don't usually take place until the offseason. But I also think it goes to show, as we were talking about earlier, that when I was watching the Jets play on Sunday against the Colts, I was thinking to myself, I don't know what's going to happen with Anthony Richardson. I don't know what his long-term or even short-term future is going to be. I just know that I'm glad they're not going with this game plan, which is to have a good young wide receiver like the Jets do, good young defensive players, a solid player out of the backfield, and try to piecemeal all of that together with a Band-Aid quarterback that's in the twilight of his career. I've seen that movie here. I'm not saying it can't work. It worked for Denver when they got Peyton Manning, right? I'm not saying it can't work, but I don't want to see that movie anymore. I'm tired of it. I just assume, to me, watching that movie in the NFL is like watching the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight on Netflix. It just buffers, and then it resets, and then you're right back to where you were. And you're like, are we doing this again? And you know that 5 minutes later it's going to rebuffer itself. No thanks. Now, in the NBA, I figured you guys would be thrilled at this. We haven't talked about it. And I talked yesterday, a couple of, I guess, media news items. Adam Alexander, my high school classmate, good buddy from North Central and just childhood friend, who does NASCAR side of things in terms of broadcasting, because he has done NASCAR and Xfinity on the Fox family of networks. And there was a lot of speculation that meant that Adam would end up doing IndyCar, since he's from Indy, and IndyCar is now going to be on Fox. We now know that is not going to be the case, because I talked to Adam yesterday, and he is going to do 10 races for the TNT family. It's now Warner Brothers, but it's TNT in partnership with Amazon Prime Video. So he'll do 5 on the Warner Brothers side and then 5 on Amazon Prime, the streaming races that they do. He then will do practice sessions for the races, the NASCAR races that are on NBC. He'll be anchoring like the practice coverage for that. So he will not be on the IndyCar side of things. He is going to, I believe, even though this is not cemented, but I think it's safe to say he will be doing races again with Xfinity. That means that the IndyCar television side of things has yet to be filled, and I don't know who that's going to be. I truly don't know who that's going to be, but I think the names that we've heard are all still very much possibilities, whether that be Alan Bestwick, Kevin Lee, Rick Allen. I don't think it's going to be anybody that people go, whoa, wait a minute, what? I could be wrong. I'm not privy to those conversations, but that's my understanding. But from a television media standpoint, I know you guys are probably thrilled because you are both fans of Inside the NBA.
Yeah.
With that, speaking of TNT, right? With Ernie Johnson and Shaq and Kenny Smith. Who's the fourth that I'm missing?
Charles.
And Charles Barkley, of course. That's going to be now, and the way it was mentioned to me or the way it was said to me was that basically they are almost like subletting that out to ESPN.
Right.
And ESPN will carry it basically in its same installment, right?
Yeah, this works for everybody involved. So all of Ernie and Shaq and Kenny and Charles will still be paid by Turner and paid by, the Warner Brother Discovery group over there. But it'll be licensed out, like you mentioned, to ESPN. For NBA fans, they win because you get the best in-studio show of any sport still alive. And for ESPN, you finally win because for years, and this has been well documented in the media circles, for years they've been trying to match the chemistry, the entertainment level, and just the viewership numbers that Inside the NBA commands on a regular basis, and they've never been able to do it. So what's the best way to, I guess, finally match that competition? Go get that competition.
Yeah, you can't beat them, join them, right?
Exactly. So and this also means, and Eddie, I know this matters to you as much as it does me, it's going to allow them to go all the way to and through the NBA Finals, whereas the past conference finals would be the end of Inside the NBA as we know it, and then you have to wait all the way till September and October. So if you're a fan of that crew like Eddie and I are, a show went from being over to now on the main.
What do you most enjoy about it? What separates it to you from the others?
I believe that there's a sense of genuine conversation that's happening, and it's like that we are privy to that conversation. Like it's just the same type of dialogue they would be having if they were off the air. I believe there's a genuine level of family between those four. From the they have a number of different segments they have where they're paired together both on and off site, where it doesn't feel scripted, it feels real, and it makes me laugh on a daily basis or weekly basis whenever I tune in. There's something funny and genuine about the chemistry between those four.
Which of the four do you most identify with?
Who do I like the best, or who do I identify the most?
Well, like on Seinfeld,
sure,
which I know is dating, but it's still on everywhere. There are four characters on Seinfeld, and people are always like, so which one's your favorite Seinfeld character? Which is your favorite character on Inside the NBA?
Shaq.
Eddie?
My favorite is Shaq.
Just because he's cool and laid back?
Well, he's laid back. He's the prankster. He's
fun.
Yeah. I think he's the most well-rounded of all of them in terms of what's going on in pop culture as well. So he brings up different things and gets...
He's also the closest for us and many, if you were to poll demographically, of recently in the league.
Yeah.
If you asked, who I see myself as the most, obviously it's Ernie, because I would... that's the role that Eddie or I would partake in.
Well, what's funny is, so Kenny Smith, I mean, you guys probably don't... I'm trying to think of a player today that Kenny Smith is the equivalent. Kenny Smith was not a star player.
Right.
I mean, he was a very good player, but he wasn't a star player. He was a complimentary piece on, kind of like he probably is on that show,
teams, right?
Well, he was, and he played a little bit of everywhere.
But when he won, that's...
I think of Kenny Smith as a Houston Rocket.
Mm-hmm.
That's the team that I think of him with. Oh, did you say?
I said Elijah won. Like that.
I thought you said the Kings.
No.
Yeah.
Hakeem would. I mean, correct. To your point, he was not the figurehead of those teams, but he was a valuable.
Correct. And
player.
I want to say he might have played in Atlanta as well, but
yeah.
And then obviously Barkley is Barkley, right? I mean, it goes without saying. The thing about Shaq that I think, and this probably is true of Barkley as well, Barkley is an interesting guy because he has reached this point, pop culturally speaking, where kind of no rules apply to him. He can just kind of do whatever. Like he gets the pass of like, well, but it's Charles Barkley. And so he can say
Sure.
things or do things that other people can't. Shaquille O'Neal, I think his entire, and this was true when he was a player, the knock on Shaquille O'Neal when he was a player was, I mean, he was so physically dominant. He was unstoppable. But the knock on him, if there was one when he was a player, eventually was that he was almost too joyous and too flippant where there were people that didn't think he took it seriously enough. Kobe Bryant diehards will tell you that because he got Shaq towards the end, even though Kobe got his first championships because of Shaq. But I think the thing that makes Shaquille O'Neal so marketable is just his totally down-to-earth nature. For a guy that is as big a pop culture star as we've seen in this country in the last 30 years, he still comes off as a guy that's just totally aware of his fortune and luck and biological lottery, and is just having fun and wants everybody to come along for the ride. I just think that's cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Stephen Holder joining us, by the way, just under 20 from now. So I didn't even ask you this, Jimmy. I should have. So this Inside the NBA, that begins when?
So the transition to ESPN will begin per their release in the 2025-26 season.
So next season.
Yeah, next year. And it sounds like that of them being a regular, the way it's phrased is they will appear on ABC, all ABC games after the first of the year in 26. So they'll probably be like an opening week kind of tentpole thing, but it won't be as every single week like it is currently with TNT. And that's a model that other, like Fox does that with their baseball crew, with Ortiz and Jeter. I don't know the whole panel. I apologize for that. I only
Pedro
know those two.
Martinez?
That's right. I forgot Pedro's on there. They only use them and break them out for the big games like All-Star Week, like opening day, like the playoffs. That kind of sounds like what they're going to transition to here.
You know what former player I have always thought is outstanding on television?
Who's that?
And part of the appeal of this former athlete on television is they seem totally cool and down to earth, which is the antithesis in every way, shape, or form as the perception of them when they were a player. I think they were seen as a player, as a diva, as almost like a team disruption. I'm going to guess, Jimmy, because this player signed a huge contract with your team and didn't really totally deliver on it, that you don't like this player?
A-Fraud?
Yes.
No, I don't. I mean, the A-Rod relationship is a tumultuous one if you're a Yankees fan like me, but I don't have disdain for him.
But I think he's very good on television.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think he's insightful.
Yes.
I think he's – the thing that I most appreciate about him is when they have older great players on, he has a great deference and respect for that. He's
naturally charming. Like he
that's
just
a
is.
very good way of putting it. Yes.
Whether it's real or not, he sells it to a point where like there's firsthand accounts of this. You go up and talk to him on the street or wherever, and he just seems like a nice, genuine, down to earth dude. Whether or not it's a show or really who he is, I have no idea.
I saw him at a restaurant in Tampa once, and he was walking to the restroom, and literally I was down in the St. Pete, Tampa area, and I was out to dinner with my cousins. And it wasn't like a super elaborate restaurant, but it was, it was just an Americana restaurant. And I'm pretty sure he lives down there, right?
Yeah.
This was in the wintertime.
Yep.
And this was probably at the very end of his playing career, if not like in the first year or two of his retirement. And I'm sitting there, and like this person walks past behind me, and I'm like, oh, that's Alex Rodriguez. I kind of thought like, holy cow, it's A-Rod. And then I looked, and I realized that as he walked past every table, at least one person at every table reached for their phone the second he passed it, either to get a picture or to like text someone like, A-Rod's in this restaurant.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can you imagine living like that?
Was
No.
Jennifer Lopez with him?
This was, I believe, is he still, when was their era? I never know with her whether it's the A-Rod era or the Ben Affleck era,
It's a
right?
great question.
So I don't know which era it was. And then wasn't he also with Madonna at one point?
Yes.
Like I would bet that, who do you think has the better resume, A-Rod or Jeter?
Jeter. He's got Jessica Alba.
It's tough to combat that.
That
Probably Jeter. Yeah.
Jeter might have the more famous, like, or the more famous resume, but I'll bet A-Rod has a pretty decent, like, you know what I mean? Jeter gave out the gift baskets.
Well, but see, I ask you about that because what's he gonna say? But shocking that I watched this because of course I would. But I watched every bit of The Captain a couple of years ago, and he thought that was ludicrous that didn't happen. Now, what's he gonna say? He's not gonna openly admit that he did the gift baskets thing, but he said, yeah, that was a story the
We're
Post
talking
ran
about
with.
Derek Jeter,
Wasn't true.
and the story allegedly always has been that when he would meet a woman, that they would sign like some sort of a non-disclosure and then also be given a gift basket that included like autographed base. Like it would not be good if you like met some girl and then she's like, oh, by the way, for your birthday, here's a Derek Jeter signed baseball.
Right.
Like,
Where'd you get that from?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, what's he going to say?
Okay.
But he pushed back heavily against that.
Here's another
in the doc.
question. Stephen Holder in 10, by the way. Yes, Eddie.
Lopez and Rodriguez ended their engagement in March of 21.
Okay. Might have been the...
In April of 21, they officially split.
And then in May of 21, she married Ben Affleck for the fourth time, right?
That sounds about right, yeah.
Okay.
And then they've said split.
Stephen Holder in 10, by the way. Gosh darn it, I was just about to ask you something else. Give me an athlete that that you feel like I just mentioned for A-Rod. Give me another athlete not from inside the NBA that you think is really good on television, or that you feel like their post-playing career on television almost usurps their level of play as a player.
Okay, so this one's not going to hit with the market. I understand this, but there's a player on the soccer coverage that I watch, and if you're in that realm with CBS, their Champions League coverage, then you know what I'm talking about. There's a player by the name of Micah Richards who largely was a role player throughout his whole career, never really won anything of high-level significance, but that's a show where the chemistry's off the charts. He seems very charming. He would fit that role. In terms of like more mainstream, I would have said the Mannings, but they achieved so much that it's hard to... Like, I like the Manning cast. I do.
That's good, yeah.
But their broadcasting career, I don't think, has usurped what they've done.
I'll tell you who's excellent. And for a player, and look, he's not. I mean, he is a great player. So his broadcast career is not going to eclipse what he was as a player. Olsen's a really good example, right? Fairly pedestrian player, very good broadcaster.
Yeah.
I think people love him as a broadcaster.
Yeah.
And I don't mean this flippantly. For the number of concussions that he suffered, the smooth nature and quick wit and everything else and observations of Troy Aikman is outstanding. I think Troy Aikman's really good. And I think he works well with Buck, right?
Sure.
That combo is obviously very good.
Chris Collinsworth?
See, I like Collinsworth.
He's definitely overachieved, yeah, for certain.
But he was a good player, though.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But would you say, I mean, especially the way NBC's committed to him, I would say at this point, at least in tenure, it's definitely surpassed it, right?
I think a lot of people, he was pretty good. I mean,
but like longevity, like he's extended his career, I think, to the point that you would have that conversation.
Probably not unlike, he's in the Pat Summerall category of that, where there are probably a lot of people that don't realize he was even a player.
Herb Street, certainly, right?
Oh, that's probably number one, right? I think Herb Street's great.
Yeah, he's awesome. And anything, NFL, college, whatever. Like, you put him there, studio show broadcaster. Yeah.
Now, there are some people that don't like Herb Street on the NFL and think that he's over his skis NFL-wise on the prime games. I don't personally believe that,
I don't either,
but I've seen that critique of him, right? Now, the only complaint I would have with Collinsworth, you guys want to guess it?
You know, here's a guy.
The slide.
I don't see, none of that bothers me.
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes.
I'm over Romo, by the way. I have been for a year and a half.
Yeah, Romo
I realize this is
wore out
better
the
talk
welcome.
for the playoffs, but Romo is, if you listen to Greg Olsen or even Brady or whoever, Romo speaks in so many platitudes and cliches to this point where the rumors about him mailing it in, I'm all about now.
Romo to me is the exact same as Not Your Father's Root Beer. When it first hit the scene,
that's a great
everybody's
one,
like, "Oh my gosh, this stuff is awesome!
Yeah.
I can't get enough of it." Have you heard about this?
That's great.
You don't even know it's. You can't even taste the alcohol. It tastes just like root beer, and it's incredible. And a friend of mine's going to Ohio, and there's a store there that barely has 8 cases, and he's going to bring one back. Everybody was all in instantaneously for like 2 weeks, and then at the same time, the entire country went, "Ugh, that's a lot." That's exactly what happened with Romo, right?
I understand Eddie's going to throw me out of the bus here for brown nosing because he claims that I do that, but legitimately, when our show is filled with anecdotes and comparisons, that's an ultimate pull. That's a great pull because everybody was on that train. Like it was awesome. It's like, oh man, I got to
for
have
like
some.
2 weeks.
You couldn't
right?
find it anywhere, and then
everybody at the exact same time was over it, right?
Yeah, that's Romo.
The thing about
certain.
Collinsworth, I'll wrap with this. No fault of his. I mean, but Collinsworth's kid, I'm not saying he doesn't do a good job.
1,000%.
But I mean,
he was doing Notre Dame games last year, and I was
like his first
over it.
job out of college was like,
insane.
congratulations, you're on national television. And you know, is there?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm old enough now that I'm like, look, I know where my ceiling is.
He's serviceable.
But for younger people, I'm like, come on.
He's
He does
serviceable
nice
in a
job.
studio
He does.
show. Like, that's fine. But the idea of him, this drove me up a wall because I could spend an hour about how it's a Notre Dame football broadcast and they never have former Notre Dame people associated with that booth. Doug Flutie was doing games and I was a kid. The fact that they did that a year ago for your first job, and it is
correct
a powerhouse program, regardless of how
was
you
he
feel
the
about Notre
play-by-play
Dame.
guy for Notre Dame?
Yes,
Is he now?
it was him and Garrett. No, they Noah Eagles doing games, and then
So
no,
did,
who is it? It's not
did
Eagle.
Jack Collinsworth
It's,
graduate beyond that?
Dan
or was-
Hicks.
No, he was demoted.
It's Dan
He was
Hicks.
demoted back to studio host with NBC for Sunday Night Football, which
It's
is
Dan
still a very
Hicks.
good gig, but it is Dan Hicks. You are
'Cause
correct.
I remember that because that's Roddy Gaines'
Yeah.
partner.
Yeah,
And
and
Olympic-
he does a great job.
Rowdy Gaines, another one. Outstanding.
But yeah, anyway, advertising Notre Dame football, and then Doug Flutie's shown on my screen, and Jason Garrett's there now. At least it's not a true bias towards. It just never made sense to me. Still doesn't.
Okay, my last thing I'll say,
Is that a
these,
chorus of
these
guns?
studio shows do not need 14 people on them. End of rant. Stephen Holder next. going to join us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line on a day that the Colts are still basking in the glow of their win over the New York Jets, and the Jets were so embarrassed by it they fired their general manager. That's basically what's happened today in the National Football League. Stephen joins us. Stephen, I'm going to begin with this question having nothing to do with football, but somebody asked me this, and I thought that's actually a good question, so I'll ask Stephen. We have discussed before, your parents, you are within your family, a first-generation American. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and your parents came here from what nation? I couldn't recall specifically. Yeah,
all good. Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, so somebody asked me this. I was thinking, for some reason I was thinking Haiti, but Trinidad and Tobago. Tobago or Tobago? Is it Tobago?
I
mean, you would know.
On where you're from, how you pronounce it. either is acceptable.
Okay, so somebody asked me this to ask you this, and I thought, well, that's a brilliant question. Which is better, Trinidad or Tobago?
So I have not been to Tobago, but so my understanding of it, though,
I'm assuming they are neighboring islands. Is that totally ignorant of me?
Yeah. They are. Yeah, you can take a ferry, I believe. But my understanding is like Tobago is very much I wouldn't say it's touristy, but tourists tend to go there because it is sort of a very scenic place. People visit Trinidad, the main island, as well. But I do think it's kind of a more, I think, a little more traditional, slower pace kind of place. Talking about Tobago, so it does draw a lot of visitors. So, yeah, very scenic type of place. So I guess I should go there next time I go back. Yeah.
But your folks obviously from Trinidad, but not Tobago, right?
Yeah, exactly. My dad actually grew up in Port of Spain, Trinidad, which is kind of the capital, big city. So yeah, I mean it's we're like a lot of people who have Caribbean roots. My family came to the U.S. and settled in New York. Both my parents were married in this country, and came without even knowing each other. But immigrant communities, people find each other, right? So we're like a lot of immigrants to this country. My grandmother and grandfather on my mom's side settled in Brooklyn, lived there for years. I spent my summers there as a kid. And so, yeah, half of Brooklyn basically is from the Caribbean. So they all did the same thing. But, yeah, it's a pretty cool story. So we're like, I guess we're pretty typical American story, I guess.
And then they figured out that the weather was closer in Miami to what they're used to, so they moved there, right?
Correct, right.
Gotcha.
It never made sense to me that people from the Caribbean, I don't know if people in Indiana have any idea about this, but the reality is that there's probably three main places that people from the Caribbean settle when they leave. And they are, at least in North America, because London's another one. But in North America, it's New York, Toronto, where I have a cousin, and Miami. So
yeah, Toronto would be a stark difference, right, in January, right?
Yes, it's absolutely. I literally have a cousin born in Trinidad who lives in Toronto. She lives there because lots of people from the Caribbean live there, and they do tend, like I said, tend to find each other. But who was the first one to come up with that idea is what I want to know. Like, who followed somebody to Toronto from like Jamaica or Trinidad? Like, what were they thinking?
Drake could probably take the claim there, I feel like.
Big, yeah, that's right. A lot of Blue Jays fans down in Trinidad is what it is, right?
Big time, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Steven, let's get to this. Anthony Richardson was really good, obviously, on Sunday. Question is this, and maybe this is like, at this point, a moot point because he played well. Now they can all three take credit. So which one do you think gets the credit for deciding to go back to Anthony Richardson and away from Joe Flacco? Was that an Irsay call, Ballard call, Shane Steichen call?
So I actually have come to believe pretty strongly that Jim Irsay was not a factor in the decision, in either decision, in benching him or reinstating him. I'm not saying he wasn't aware or involved, kept abreast. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I don't think he was the one who spearheaded either decision. I really do think, and I don't just think this, I mean, this is what I believe based on what I've learned. I believe this is a Shane Steichen decision really on both ends. to bench him and to reinstate him. Now, I think there are questions about, whether it was necessary ultimately, but the results, at least for now, looks pretty good. So everybody comes out looking good. It looks like Shane Steichen was, I'm just saying appearances, right? It looks like Shane Steichen was smart to bench him because he presumably got Richardson's attention and he dialed in, and look what happened. It looks good for Richardson because he stepped up and he did what he needed to do. He took ownership. So everybody comes out smelling pretty good right now. Of course, you have to keep the results coming for that to remain true. But I do agree with you. Everybody comes out looking pretty good right now. And maybe 5 or 6 years from now, we'll look back on this and have a good laugh about it. I don't know. But I do think if Richardson goes on to become a player, the legend, whether it's true or not, or completely accurate or not, will be, well, that was the moment in his career that got him going. And then he had that big game against the Jets. I could see that. I'll probably end up writing that story one day if he ends up making it. So we'll see. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
So here's the question, Stephen. Look, he was really good against New York. And part of that, I wonder if that was because they finally took the bubble wrap off of him, took the training wheels off, and said, you know what, we're not going to baby him. We're going to do what he does well, which is we're going to orchestrate and design plays for him specifically to run, which is going to draw the defense up for New York and then allow the crossing patterns to open up and allow him to kind of get in rhythm a little bit with some passes to guys that are actually open. So the question is, was it simply coming up with a better game plan for him that was the advantage, or did he truly learn that much in 2 weeks?
Well, so look, he did dial in. That is true. However, you are correct, right? I mean, he hasn't played a lot of football, granted, but I mean, come on. He's got a little bit of time on task that he couldn't turn into a different player in 2 weeks, right? That is certainly the case. So what happened? I do think it's what you said, the former and not the latter. I think Shane Steichen really and Jim Bob Cooter to a degree, I think they played a game or called a game that worked for Anthony Richardson. And then on his end, on the player's end, I think what happened is, look, I mean, he was pressing, I do think, to a degree before he was benched. If the benching did anything for him, one of those things is certainly it allowed him to just say, screw it. I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to let it rip. And I think when you're out there trying to be perfect, and he was being overanalyzed because that's what we do with young quarterbacks, and he was afraid to lose the game for his team, all these things, sort of these competing emotions going on in his 22-year-old mind, in addition to dealing with defensive linemen chasing you. I mean, that's a lot, right? And so I really believe this was the game, and people who know him told me, like, he really relaxed and he settled in, and Anthony said this as well. He was relaxed more so than at any point. And I thought his game reflected that. So that's where I really think this benching was beneficial, if at all. It allowed him to take a step back and just take a breath and then go back out there with a renewed sense and a renewed mind. And then it allowed, I think, the coaches to step back and say, all right, let's take another stab at this. And they did a good job of allowing him to be him, evidenced, by the way, by the very first offensive play, what they called. They called a quarterback run. Michael Pittman missed the block. He got 0 yards, but that's not the point. They allowed him – they let him play the game that he wants to play.
Stephen Holder joins us, covers the Colts for ESPN. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. On your piece on ESPN.com, you highlighted the set of offensive packaging that was built around Anthony Richardson on Sunday, which included more throws on the run, designed quarterback runs for him. That was a complaint before he got benched with Joe Flacco, was there wasn't enough of that. But they also allowed him to make decisions whether or not he wanted to tuck and run or make a throw on the run or try to make a play with his arm versus his legs. How much of what you saw on Sunday is not just sustainable for him, but preventable for opposing defenses? Like the way they schemed offensively, is that scheme-proof defensively, or are they going to have to get creative and more inventive with him on a weekly basis to keep him consistent, if that makes sense?
Right. Well, I mean, it depends on the defense, certainly, but let's start by saying this. I know, look, the Jets are a laughingstock. I mean, we're laughing at them right now, right?
Yeah.
for obvious reasons. That being said, their defense is very legitimate. Like, it's good. Their front seven is, I mean, comparable to the better fronts in the NFL. And I say that with all seriousness. I mean, Quinnen Williams, first of all, like, that guy is a top 5 defensive tackle in the NFL. Like, he's that good. And then you've got other guys in that front seven who are tough to deal with. So anyway, I don't want to diminish anything they did in that game because of the opponent. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say to your question more specifically, they put him in position, and particularly the RPO game that they run. I mean, that requires the quarterback to make decisions. Now, it allows them to simplify the decision for the quarterback, which is good, because it's one of two things. You're making a quick read, and then you're making the decision based on that. But he did that, I thought, very effectively. And then they gave him some – I don't want to say they gave him quick throws, but he knew in many cases where he was going with the ball oftentimes before the snap. And that's the next level. I think you saw that with Anthony Richardson, and whether that was a product of the play calling, it's certainly related to the play calling, but it's also on the quarterback to know what he's looking at, understand it, and act accordingly. So even when they weren't RPO plays in some instances, he's dropping back quickly and in rhythm, getting rid of the ball quickly and very decisively. That's what I took away from it was, man, he looks sharper because he knows what he's doing. There's no hesitation. There's no indecisiveness. That's what you got to do, because those windows, those passing windows, they close so fast. If you think 1/2 a second too long, now the ball's getting intercepted, right? And so he just played with a lot more confidence and decisiveness. If he can do that, he's going to be a better player because he has the arm talent, he has the physical talent. I mean, he has all of that. The problems were elsewhere. So this is a great sign for him.
Stephen, who do you think grew more in the 2 weeks that Joe Flacco was put in as the starter? Anthony Richardson or Shane Steichen?
That's a great question. Because I think they both did have some growth and needed to grow some. I would say probably Anthony, just because for him, I know. Look, he put a happy face on this, but I mean, it was pretty devastating when he got benched. Okay, it was extremely devastating, and he handled it the right way, to his credit. And he picked himself up and he dusted himself off and he got down to business and did what was asked of him. So I can't give him enough credit for that. That is the mature thing to do. That's the right thing to do. On the other hand, you are right to ask about Shane in this question too, because I do think he had some growth here as well. And one of the ways that you saw that, I thought, was just in the way he governed himself in his play calling on Sunday. For example, he stuck with the run game into the second half after the Jets had adjusted and were really shutting down the run game. He still did keep them honest by calling runs. And I think that is growth for Shane Steichen, because too many times this season I've seen where if they get shut down a couple of times, he starts getting pass happy. And at that point, when you do that, you are putting so much stress on the young quarterback when it's pass. If you give him a little bit of a break and a breather at times with the run game, I think it allows you to be more effective when you pick your spots in the passing game. So I just think they both really did grow up a good bit the last couple of weeks, or at least there was some self-reflection, at least, right, by both parties, Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson. And Anthony Richardson's a young quarterback. We have certainly hit that point, ad nauseum. But Shane Steichen is also a young coach, I think, and we have to remember that. He has been a play caller for a long time, but when you're the offensive coordinator working underneath a head coach, there's always somebody to check you and say, hey, what are we doing? Don't do that. Chill out. Well, when you're the head coach and you're calling the plays, there's nobody to do that. That has to come from within you, or you have to listen to the people who work beneath you. So I think that shows growth on his part quite a bit.
On the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, he is Stephen Holder, covers the Colts for ESPN. Stephen, we talked about when the benching happened that it's nearly impossible. There's not a ton of sample sizes to show that when you take the keys away from a rookie quarterback, they're going to be able to thrive still in that same system, with that same staff, with that same personnel. If we're looking for reasons to be hopeful, if you're a Colts fan, along with Sunday's performance, why would it be the exception to the rule here in Indianapolis that they could look back on this and, like you mentioned, it's just a turning point and a learning curve versus a day that set the franchise back?
Right, great question. So I think the issue is why do most of those situations play out the way that they do? Because generally they have been benched. Those past quarterbacks you're talking about, they've been benched because people gave up on them, and rightfully so in many cases, of course, right? But here, I think that was the question: are they giving up on him? And we weren't sure. And I honestly, until they reinstated him, I still wondered, okay, is Shane Steichen just not a believer anymore? I didn't know, and I think them going back to him so quickly, I think it has to suggest that, okay, they actually do believe there's something there and that they can make something happen here. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's not a guarantee. But if they were completely out, if Shane Steichen was completely out, I think he would have done this with a lot less conviction if he did it at all, frankly. And so this is what separates this situation from all those other 20 or 30, sort of dozens of quarterbacks who were, who flamed out with their first team and never got another shot with those teams. If the rationale for benching him is accurate, if it is honest and true, what they said, then that separates it, because they didn't bench him because they were done with him. They benched him with a long-term vision in mind. At least that's what they tell us.
Stephen, is there any chance that Anthony Richardson was benched either because A, he was hurt, or B, because they knew that they were getting ready to go into a gauntlet and wanted to take the heat off of him and put it on Flacco?
Well, I don't think he was hurt. I mean, he was certainly banged up a little bit because he was on the injury report after the Houston game, but he practiced and we saw him out there and he didn't seem to be limited to, as far as I could tell. So I don't think it was an injury situation. Whether the schedule played a role in the decision, that's harder to tell. I think we did look at that part of the schedule. Who was it against? The Vikings and who am I forgetting? It all runs together. The point is,
so the Vikings. You talking about the two games he missed? The Vikings and Bills. Right. Sorry,
senior moment. So anyway, we certainly looked at those two games as like, all right, that's trouble for the young quarterback.
Right.
When we talked about them weeks ago, right? So you can see a scenario where that plays a role in the decision. It doesn't mean that was the entirety of the decision, but do I think it entered into their thinking, to say, hey, if he's not on the screws with his preparation, then he's definitely not going to be ready for these two opponents. Brian Flores-led Vikings defense and a Buffalo defense that's really physical and active, right? So I think it's reasonable to at least ask or speculate whether the opponents played a role in how they govern themselves with that decision. I don't think it's irrelevant. I think it's at least related to the decision, yes.
Stephen, this from our friend Matthew, who's a show listener and works in like international trade, shipping and cargoing and that kind of thing, setting and organizing those things. Hey, Jake, I one time had a shipment to Tobago that was delayed due to goat racing. Now, do you know anything about this? Is goat race? Does that mean people are getting on goats and racing them, or does that mean they just turn goats loose and race them?
I'm guessing it's the latter. They turn them loose and race them. So, fun fact, my dad, his family raised goats when he was a kid.
Raised or raced? Raised, right? R-A-I-S-E-D. Okay.
Yes, raised. They may have raced them too. I never asked, but now I have something to ask him. So that is pretty.
Your dad's family were thoroughbred farmers, right?
I'll tell you what, though, based on that listener feedback, I think I really want to go to Tobago now. I mean, after hearing this, so
Heck yeah.
I'm even more intrigued now after hearing that. I will also tell you that goats produce a lot more than just milk. Goat meat is fantastic if you've never had it. So I know. A lot of people will turn their noses up at that and think that's crazy. But I'm telling you right now, listen, this past weekend in New York, I failed to get to one of my favorite, one of my preferred Caribbean food spots. But had I done that, I would have had some curried goat.
Listen,
which is amazing.
Steven, you ever been to Jamaican Patties here in town? Patties of Jamaica?
Yeah, all the time.
At 52nd and Allisonville?
Yes, all
Okay.
the time.
It's the greatest, right?
Well, listen. You're just scratching the surface there, buddy. Okay, let me tell you. Like, we'll one of these days we'll connect and we'll meet me in South Florida one of these days, and I will change your life.
Yeah, if I'm just swinging by the neighborhood in South Florida, I'll do that, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing.
If you happen to be in the neighborhood.
I know this much, though. All I know about goat racing is this. Do you know the most important characteristic for a goat if it's going to be a racing goat?
Blinkers on or not?
Besides that, the one thing you want it to be?
I'm racing for this.
Fast.
Oh, my God.
Thank you, Steve. You can use that with the kids if you want. And by the way, my condolences on Lawrence North.
We had a good run. So would have been fun. But good luck to Mike Wells and Brownsburg Bulldogs. Begrudgingly.
That's right. All right, Stephen, I'll meet you you go to Patty's of Jamaica. Tell Stefan I said hi. Tell him I sent you in there, and then I'll meet you in there sometime.
Sounds like you're meeting him at gate B6.
That's right. We'll get some patties and head down and swing down to South Florida. Stephen Holder, Express Pro Tires and Auto Guest Line. Appreciate it, Stephen.
See you.
All right, Stephen Holder joining us. The goat racing would be fun to watch, wouldn't it? Now the goats do.
Is it organized?
Those are those. What's the difference between a sheep and a goat?
I'm not even going to try to.
Or a lamb and a sheep. A lamb is a baby sheep. Is that right? And then a goat. Are they like cousins? Do we know?
You're right about the lamb and the sheep. I don't know where the goat figures in.
A goat baby is a kid.
More
right?
likely to find one on a mountain, I think. It's the difference.
Do all goats have horns? Is that the only difference?
I feel like there's got to be more.
What's a ewe?
Who's on first?
Exactly. But a ewe's somewhere in that mix too, isn't it?
I believe so.
Or no, what's a yak? Yak is more like an ox, right?
Yes.
So now we're getting
That's
away
yards
from
after catch.
That's
Indeed. Indeed.
Thank you.
Well
Eddie.
played.
Thank you. I do know that's the one acronym that I do know. Yak.
Or something you do when you have too much of the query quencher.
You know what? Thank you for mentioning that. That's coming up Thursday night. Hi-Fi. There are still tickets available at 1075thefan.com. We are doing a toast for Moselle Sanders. Hoping to raise $10,000, feed 10,000 people for Thanksgiving. And the drink that I came up with, we each came up with our own signature cocktail. The Query Quencher, thank you, Eddie. Perfect segue. It is Jack Daniel's apple. It is Domenico rum and a little bit of caramel syrup. Tasty as can be. Tastes just like it's this time of year, right? I'm like a candy apple. I know it's kind of more a Halloween thing, but just like an autumn thing and a winter thing. It's cozy, it's warm, it's toasty. Query Quencher, one of the beverages that are available, but a number of us from the different radio stations will be there, and you can try the different signature drinks and see which one is the most to your liking. Hi-Fi Indy, which is a very cool spot in Fountain Square, and all of the information available at the events tab, 1075thefan.com. Okay, now my mom sends me this. I don't know if my mom's correct or not, but it's my mom, so I can't dispute it, right? My mom says, and somebody out there that's a farming expert, tell me if my mom's right or wrong on this. But
Hi,
this
Jake.
seems
It's your mom.
Hi, Jake. It's mom. This seems very dialed in to be inaccurate. She says a ewe is a female lamb. Lambs have heavy fur whisk, which is spun into wool. Surprisingly, sheep are related to goats.
I'm not going to fight that at all. Sounds too efficient to be wrong.
I cannot argue with Mama Query.
Yeah, that too.
Now, but other people have told me that a ewe, but I thought a lamb is a baby sheep. So wouldn't a ewe then be a sheep? You see what I'm saying?
I understand the wires
Okay.
that you're.
I need you to
aligning
look
there.
up, Jimmy, for me the definition of a ewe, please.
Oh, that's a Netflix show.
Thank you, Eddie. What is the definition of a ewe according to the Wikipedia, which is all-knowing?
Is a female sheep that is at least 1 year old.
A female sheep.
Yes.
Okay, now a lamb.
Sheeps are bred to have lambs.
Okay, so lamb is a baby sheep. So lamb and sheep are the same thing.
Ram, adult male sheep. Lamb, a sheep that is less than 12 months old.
So a lamb is a baby sheep. Now, what are then are goats and sheep related?
No, I'm not related to a sheep.
No, so you're the goat? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fair enough.
Could be the bad connotation there, depending on how you're taking it. Yes, sheep and goats are closely related, but they are a separate species.
They're cousins, right?
Yeah, I'd probably.
You know
the
what?
Cleanest way to
Here's
do that.
the thing. This is all I know. I'll bet you somehow or another there's a donkey that fits into this equation.
Most sheep
You ever
don't
notice
have
that?
horns.
There's always a donkey.
There's
that's
always
rolling
an
around.
ass in
There
all
is.
of this.
There is. There's always a donkey that rolls around and it screws up all the genetics and everything.
You
right?
asked about this earlier. Most sheep don't have horns. Goats tend to have straight,
Yeah.
upright horns.
Yeah, that comes from the donkey, right? Somehow the donkey got mixed in.
no,
all
here's your donkey aspect of it. Sheep tails usually hang down, while goat tails tend to stick straight up.
Ah, okay. Isn't there always a donkey on the farm that causes all kinds of problems? Gets drunk one night and then all of a sudden you come up with some new mix of animals.
Eddie's right here. I don't understand what we're doing.
I just told you, I'm a goat. I can't be an ass.
Okay.
Depends what day it is.
GOAT is another acronym that I realize people use all the time in the world of sports that drives me crazy. Because everybody,
The good way or the bad way?
everybody's, that guy's the GOAT. What do you mean? Like, to me, there is only one sport. There is only one professional sport. Okay. Of all the major pro sports, baseball, football, basketball, hockey, and then even individualized sports, golf, tennis.
Sure.
To me, there is only one sport has the most irrefutable, undeniable, greatest of all time. There's only one sport.
Hockey.
Yes. Give me a sport off the top of your head, Jimmy.
Tennis.
Okay, tennis. You could certainly make the argument for any of the three, Roger Federer, right?
Sure. Nadal.
Any of them that are Djokovic, any of them, right? For the female side, obviously Serena or Venus,
Yeah.
right? Martina Navratilova in her prime. It's probably Serena from a women's standpoint, but you have discussion elsewhere, right? Baseball, I mean, baseball is really hard to define because there's so many different unique positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Basketball, I realize that still Michael Jordan, based on the championships, would be the guy. But there is a compelling argument that can be made based on versatility for LeBron James. Certainly, LeBron is adding to his legacy from an individualized standpoint, almost unquestionably because of the age at which he's doing things. But Wayne Gretzky is so far ahead of the rest of his competition. And I know I didn't see Gordie Howe. I know I didn't see Bobby Orr. And it's not like I was sitting around watching a ton of, Edmonton Oilers, Los Angeles Kings, St. Louis Blues hockey with Wayne Gretzky. But Wayne Gretzky, at the time of his retirement, held the most important record in all of sport, which is he held the record for most records held. It's pretty impressive, right? And then the wife, also solid. for Wayne Gretzky, just so you know.
So he checks all boxes for you then?
The daughter isn't as bad either.
Well, usually that apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Eddie. That's the point there, right?
I know.
For what that's worth. The Pacers last night falling short in Toronto. You made a really good point earlier, Jimmy, that I probably neglected to mention, and that is that while I was impressed by their overall effort, considering how shorthanded they were, the reality is they were going up against a terrible team, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Raptors had 2 wins coming into this through the first 24. We talk about how great the Cavaliers have been, still undefeated, and that's a good game tonight against the Celtics, see if they can continue their winning ways. But the Raptors side
It's
of
in
things...
the Garden, right?
It is in the Garden. You are correct, Eddie. But the Raptors side of things, they've been the polar opposite of that, and they gave opportunities for the Pacers despite everything that they were going through from a injury standpoint, with no Miles Turner, with the depth aspects that have been cut in half the last couple of weeks. 23 turnovers, Indiana makes 24 points out of those. I don't have the stats on that in front of me, but I would imagine a game where you're winning the turnover margin plus 13, even in today's NBA, you're going to have a pretty good chance to win that game. And why it concerns me is until you get Nesmith and Nembhard back in the fold, I'm not even worrying about the front court issues. They'll figure that out, whether it's at the trade market or maybe Moses Brown winds up being a bright depth spot for them. As long as they're without Nembhard and Nesmith, you are asking on a nightly basis Siakam, Halliburton, Mathurin, and Turner to be all-star level players.
Correct.
And you can make the argument that you're paying them to be that to some extent. I know Mathurin's still on a rookie deal, so you could say, oh, well, they're paid to do that. Well, it is tough in the NBA to be that heroic and that great on a nightly basis without flaws. And when you take one away for nagging injury or load management or whatever, I know with Miles it wasn't load management. I don't want to get that connotation there. It was legitimately he couldn't go, but you're not going to have that luxury for the next couple of weeks. And the only saving grace is the rest of the East outside of the top 3 teams, maybe not the same injury boat, but are very mediocre right now or parity driven if you want to go that lane. And that's something to watch out for, because we saw it when Halliburton got hurt 2 years ago. They wound up not being able to have sustained success, and the hole was too big for them to be a legitimate playoff threat. I'm not saying that's going to be the case this year. It just worries me, how many pieces can you lose before the ground that you're giving up is too much?
They've got a very important stretch coming up after they finish this 3-game road trip in Houston tomorrow night, at Milwaukee Friday night. You've got Washington, New Orleans, Portland, Detroit, all coming to Gainbridge Fieldhouse.
All
That is
very winnable,
such
Yeah.
a critical 4-game stretch this early in the year, because the Pacers, Tyrese Halliburton specifically, have been really good at home. If you can win all 4 of those games, you don't really lose ground, because as Jake, you like to point out, even though they may win against Boston, they'll offset it somewhere else with
Correct.
a loss. And you can't offset any losses right now against those 4 teams.
Last night is a game that they're going to need to offset somehow by winning a game, to get back to square one by winning a game they're not supposed to. By the way, hey, Jake, donkeys kick coyotes from harming other animals with their kicks. That's why you see them in animal path. I didn't know that. You get a donkey. The donkey's the goon. He just goes and...
He's the muscle?
Yeah, he's the muscle.
Who knew?
Don't mess with the chickens. The donkey comes over and has your back. I like that about... I didn't know that about donkeys. Well, that's kind of cool, right?
That's why you're the donkey, Jake.
I like that about donkeys. Did you know that about donkeys?
I did not know that, no. Educate and entertain.
Now, isn't there another kind of animal that's a cross between like a horse and something else? Is that the donkey? What's a donkey, like half horse, half bull, something like that? Do we know?
It's not a direct line from the horse. You are correct. I just don't know what the other one
What's
is.
the other? So there was another animal that got drunk one night and started messing around with something with the horse, and then it ended up you get a donkey, right? Can you see what a donkey's a mix of? Apparently something that likes to go out and fight. I like that. So the horse is just minding his own business, and then some drunken other animal comes in, mates with it, and that's how you end up with a donkey. And so therefore the donkey now is the one that's going around. He's the goon because he's got the fighting breed in him, right? Is that what that is?
Yes. I'm failing in this because at this stage now donkeys just make other donkeys. So I don't know. I'm
donkey's
struggling
part
with...
mule and part horse.
There it is. Okay, there you go.
Now what's the mule? I thought he was part donkey.
Oh, jeez. Can we go to break?
Jimmy's plays of the day are next, mercifully.
Today's plays of the day all focused on basketball, college and the NBA. Heavy scoopage tonight so far on these plays of the day. We'll start first with the Cleveland Cavaliers trying to continue their undefeated ways as they go to TD Garden against the Boston Celtics. We'll scoop the 6.
Did you just say Titty Garden?
TD Garden.
Okay.
TD Garden. I feel like that's unnecessary. I definitely said TD and you knew what I meant.
I heard TT.
They're doing away with the FCC anyway, right?
Yeah,
So
is that oh yeah.
let's go.
I'll scoop the 6 for the Cleveland Cavaliers as they are in Boston against the Celtics. A little bit later tonight, Denver Nuggets take on the Memphis Grizzlies. I will lay 5.5 on the Grizzlies. No Nikola Jokic tonight for the Denver Nuggets. Last one for you in the college ranks. We'll scoop the 5 on the Purdue Boilermakers. They're on the road against Marquette. They're 5-point underdogs. I'll scoop 5 points there for Purdue. Eddie, any plays for you?
I'll take the over in Memphis and Denver. 223.5. I'll take the over there.
All right. Those are your plays of the day.
So, okay. A donkey, a mule is a cross between a donkey and a horse. So the donkey, when he's not keeping order,
Yeah.
gets together with a horse, and then you get a mule. Now, then we got this one, the zonkey. Are you familiar with the zonkey?
I'm assuming zebras involved there based on the lettering.
Correct.
Okay. Not familiar, but just
Zonkey
context clues.
is a cross between a zebra and a donkey. Now, the zebra is not a horse, right?
No.
But it looks like a horse.
Sure. Very C-level movie Racing Stripes came out in the early 2000s about a zebra they tried to race.
And the zebra, J&B will remember this, zebra was the mascot of the Fruity Stripes gum, which
Yes, it
was
was.
awesome and lasted until you got basically to the car. Then the flavor was...
That's it. About 5 seconds of flavor
That
right
is
there.
correct.
Like juicy fruit.
Oh, you get a nice Pitfall
How
T-shirt
about
there.
that? Pitfall Hair. This is the greatest in-home console video game of all time.
Which-
is it not?
Which one was that?
It was the one, it was kind of a playoff of Indiana Jones.
No, I know
Oh.
Pitfall. I'm talking about which gaming system. Pitfall was on all
well,
of them,
it was
wasn't
for Atari,
Okay.
2600.
See, I
It
was thinking
Activision made it. Remember, Activision had Pitfall, Kaboom, Stampede,
What-
River Raid.
What about Pong?
Barnstorming? Pong was Atari.
Okay. We did not have an Atari when I was a kid, but my buddy had an Intellivision. You remember
yeah,
Intellivision?
Oh, yeah. Had the little keypad.
Correct. I loved Intellivision baseball. Loved it. And then from that, you went from Intellivision to ColecoVision was around for a brief period.
Yep.
And then that morphed into
ColecoVision for a minute had Donkey Kong. It had the best version of Donkey Kong for a minute. Plus had Zaxxon, which
And
was
then
one of the worst video games ever.
ColecoVision was then the next step up would have been Nintendo.
Correct. Yeah.
And then from Nintendo, you went to Sega, and then all bets were off.
Well,
at that
remember in
point.
there was an Atari 2600, and they came out with an Atari 5200. That
Twice the power of the 2600.
and it went over like the Betamax did.
Right.
Like the 2600 turned out to be VHS, and the 5200 was Betamax.
What game
I
was
sound
your...
like a conversation Jimmy to be having somewhere right here.
Well, I'm just trying to get over the fact that we declared greatest video game of all time, despite the advancements that we've had the last
Hey,
40
you know
years.
what?
But hey,
you
it's
know
okay.
what you guys can
It's
do
all right.
with your
Yeah,
stinking
yeah, we could
advancements.
shove it. I understand.
God
Part
dang.
of, to be honest with you, Jimmy, part of, and I realize, I mean, now the advance as you're talking about with video games, part of the allure back then was the chase of the next evolution up because it was off by just so like you couldn't grasp that it was going to be any better.
And
It was
we
like-
still lived that. Like you go from 64-bit consoles to the next generation of gaming, like that. We saw that where it's like, how much better can the graphics get? Now they just add a layer of sweat. It's like, oh,
We were
this
better
is
when
so
the
cool.
graphics were worse.
Yeah.
We were better with no social media. The
What was
social
your
media
favorite-
did when we got to go to the mall and hang out, like face-to-face conversations and not any of this crap.
if you
This sucks.
if you, John, I can tell you what it is for me. If you could right now get any gaming console and any one game to be able to still play regularly, what would you go with?
So what was it? Which Nintendo, or was it Sega or Nintendo that had Road Rash on it? You guys remember Road Rash?
I don't remember Road Rash.
Road Rash was the mid-90s.
My
And
guess
it was
would
a
be Sega, but I don't
motorcycle
know.
game where you rode a crotch rocket and you raced, and every race that you won, wherever you finished, you won some amount of money, and you got to buy parts. But maybe the best part about it is between races, when you were buying your parts, they played alternative music from the 90s, and there was a lot of bad
I do remember that.
a lot of Bad Motorfinger from Soundgarden's album on there too, Outshined, Rusty Cage. So I'd go with that. Yeah, I think Mike Tyson's Punch-Out's somewhere on the
Pop
list.
this up
RBI
if you could, Eddie.
baseball. So
I mean, this you can't hear it, John, but this is just the
Yep.
best. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was the best.
yeah. Well, see, I love the original Maddens when Pat Summerall would say, "Oh no, there's a man down," and remember the sound effect was them cracking a chicken bone in half, and oh no, there's a man down.
The other one to me that was really hard to I mean, I would spend hours upon hours upon hours playing, and I actually memorized different lineups strictly off of RBI baseball. And then with it, when you'd play RBI baseball, the music would change whether you had runners on or off base. We're listening to it right now. But my buddy Dewey and I would play it, and we would use pillowcases to cover our hands so you couldn't see what pitch you were getting ready to set up.
Yeah. RBI baseball?
John Franco was impossible on RBI baseball to hit.
I don't have to leave the 90s to do this. And I'm not saying that it's better than RBI baseball, but Mario Kart 64 is going to be at the top or near the top of any of those lists.
Pretty high on the list. Super Mario Brothers on Nintendo was pretty awesome, too.
Sure.
I loved NHL 95.
Oh, man. Do you remember, John, when NHL 94 came out, or maybe it was 95, the NHL was ready to be a big thing because people knew about it from the game, and then they went on strike, and it just killed it.
It did. It absolutely killed it. And it's funny. We used to play with the offsides off all the time. Like I think everybody else would as well.
Right.
Like I played with the Blackhawks, and I had Jeremy Roenick.
Oh, yeah.
And I think Phil Housley was a part of that, too.
Was Chelios after that, or was he there?
Chelios was on that team, too. He was more of a defenseman.
Pavel Bure was a beast for Vancouver.
He was tough. Okay, it was Roenick, Larmer, Gretzky, Messier, Yager, Bure, Yzerman, who was the one of the Red Wings too? Sergei Fedorov.
Yeah,
Fedorov was another guy. But these are all guys that were absolutely unstoppable. So I normally play with the Blackhawks because they had more. And I forget who was between the pipes for them back then. Their goalie, but he was pretty decent,
I remember,
too. Tom Barrasso was the goalie.
Van Beesbrook was a goalie that was always hot on that thing, too.
Mike Richter for the Rangers.
They won the Stanley Cup in 94 over Pavel Bure.
And here's one more, too. The greatest play all time on Madden 94 was the Chargers, Stan Humphries to Tony Martin, and the vaunted will work every time QB waggle. When you called for the QB waggle.
This, I'll tell you what worked every time. Did you ever play Bill Walsh's college football on Sega?
I did not.
The Georgia team, the 80 Georgia team with Herschel Walker, all you had to do was throw a tight end slant, but actually dump it off to Herschel Walker. Touchdown every time.
Yeah, obviously, Tecmo Bo Jackson
on
was
Tecmo
pretty
Bo
awesome.
was a cheat code.
But
what's lined up on the big show today,
We're going to
John?
do a lot of cold. We got to figure out what's wrong with Tyrese Halliburton here. I saw Tony East send out how Halliburton starts games, how bad he starts games. That's an incredible stat. Like, he's an 0 for the season, I think, in his first 3 shots, it seems, at the start of each game. He starts so badly, he can't get around anybody right now. Is it all about this whole back situation that he says is not an issue, or is there something else here? Because he can't get around you, and then on the other end, he can't guard you, which is problematic.
And he looks to me at times that like mental lapses. You know what I mean? Like just a lazy pass here.
Because this all works on you, man. This all works on you. You can tell he's been worked over as far as thinking about where he was last year and what he's not doing right now. This does work on you a little bit.
So John's up next.
So the Raptors turned it over 23 times, Eddie, yesterday. Has any team ever won by double figures, scored 130 while turning the ball over 23 times in a game? That has to be.
Not sure.
That has to be as unique. I think
I would bet you one of those like back in the day Fat Lever Nuggets teams probably did.
My goodness. They turned it over 23 times, won by double figures, and scored 130
They were playing the
points.
Mad Ants.
Huh?
They were playing the Mad Ants. That's probably why, right?
My goodness.
John's up
All right,
next.
guys.
We'll be back with you at noon tomorrow. Thanks so much for listening to Query & Company.